Story 1.
I discovered my wife's cheating after finding something in her purse that unraveled the truth. My name is Sal, short for Salvatore, and I'm from Italy. My parents moved to the United Kingdom in the late 1960s. We had a popular Italian restaurant that not only supported my immediate family but also extended to distant relatives, including many cousins. Though we're not always in each other's pockets, we're a close-knit family. We make an effort to gather for family events to avoid our beloved grandmother's disapproving gaze. She's the matriarch of our clan. 7 years ago, Connie, who always insisted on obedience, became my wife. We both decided to marry around the age of 30 after being in a relationship without a clear direction. Although it was satisfying in some ways, it lacked the elements needed for a long-term commitment. For almost 2 years, we enjoyed each other's company, attended parties, and had a great time before deciding to exchange vows. Unfortunately, my grandmother never fully accepted Connie, maintaining a tolerant attitude towards her. She was never openly rude, but there was always a look of disbelief in her eyes, as if she expected Connie to make a mistake. Where women get such intuition is a mystery to me. My grandmother had a tough time hiding her emotions from my wife, even though she never expressed her opinions in front of others. Just before our marriage, my grandmother warned me to keep an eye on Connie, expressing concerns about something bothering her. These words continued to echo in my head for unknown reasons. About a month ago, I discovered that my wife was secretly dating another man. They met regularly for at least 6 months, and I found out after a thorough investigation. Surprisingly, finding the truth wasn't as difficult as I expected. One evening, a small oversight on her part raised suspicions. It all started with a minor detail: a pen. A cheap, ordinary pen usually given as a hotel souvenir. Its sudden appearance puzzled me, because I couldn't recall staying at the hotel from where she got it. I usually prefer well-known hotel chains about once a month, although I'm accumulating loyalty points. But they're not that great. One evening, while walking with Connie, I needed a pen. She rummaged in her big purse and pulled one out for me. However, after finishing writing, I noticed an inscription on the handle that caused a small alarm. I knew I hadn't stayed at the hotel indicated on the pen, leading to my confusion. Without saying a word, I handed the pen back to Connie. Although seemingly insignificant, this small crack in our marriage could lead to significant consequences. Strangely, I chose to push it aside as we were meeting friends for a delightful evening over dinner, drinks, and dancing. With 2 other couples, we found ourselves in the cozy lounge bar of our favorite restaurant just when the infamous pen made its significant move. It was a place where we always felt comfortable and could enjoy a relaxed atmosphere. Additionally, the restaurant owner was one of my cousins, allowing us a generous family discount. We reciprocated by expressing our support for the establishment. The discounts helped us strike the perfect balance between gratitude and not undermining the owner's authority, a mutually beneficial arrangement that worked harmoniously. The other couples present that evening were Carlo and his wife, Joanna, as well as Phil and Terry. Carlo and Joanna were a bit older than us, about 5 years. Despite our distant relationship, we still considered ourselves a family. Carlo had somewhat old-fashioned behavior, and his life was quite interesting, although not entirely within the law. Despite his formidable personality, underneath the intimidating exterior was an incredibly kind and gentle person. You couldn't find a better person unless you managed to upset him. Just one piece of advice: don't. Carlo was like an older brother to me, always ready to support and be a reliable companion who knew how to keep me out of trouble. His wife, Joanna, was a charming woman who shared a deep love with Carlo, making them an ideal couple. She was not only beautiful but also the only person who could intimidate Carlo, although he openly adored her without any doubt. I was fortunate to get to know Phil through work, and we immediately found a common language. We were the same age and had similar views on life. Sometimes we played golf together, and our friendship went beyond the golf course. Phil's wife, Terry, joined us during chats at the golf club, and everything seemed to be going well. It was noticeable that Terry and Connie got along well. Often they spent days on excessive shopping trips, buying everything in a row and spending what felt like an eternity on it. All I saw were the huge bags that Connie brought home after such outings. While Phil was consistently warm and friendly, Terry sometimes seemed distant, especially lately. But there came a moment when she suddenly joined the team completely. I often suspected something was wrong with her and repeatedly told Connie about it. However, she brushed it off, resorting to the typical excuses about women's problems when a woman doesn't want to share something. While we were in a comfortable area enjoying cocktails, Carlo and Joanna entered. I stood up to warmly greet them with hugs and kisses. A prompt waiter quickly brought new drinks to our table. Connie was always amazed at how well we were treated wherever we went. Considering the 6 of us, my cousin efficiently directed us to our reserved table, our usual spot with both privacy and a view of the entrance. Carlo always preferred this window view, and although curious, we didn't ask why. Joanna inquired about Phil and Terry, mentioning she had talked to Connie earlier and knew they might be a bit late since Phil was not home yet. Observing the interaction between the two women, Carlo gave me a significant look. I met his gaze, but he subtly shook his head, choosing to leave things as they were. I mentally noted to discuss this with Carlo later. After finishing our first drinks, Phil and Terry finally arrived, looking a bit flushed. Carlo watched them with an unfathomable expression. I noticed the familiar look again and wondered what Carlo knew. Something important was definitely happening. As we settled into our seats, we quickly delved into discussions about work, upcoming plans, and the usual talk about our families and children. After a delightful meal, we returned to the lounge area with music playing. At this point, the girls were eager to hit the dance floor. The three of us guys sat for a while, realizing our duty was to accompany them. Carlo took the lead and escorted Joanna back to our table after the first song. Glancing around, I noticed Phil and Terry still on the dance floor, but there was an awkwardness between them. I quietly asked Connie if they were okay. She replied, "I think so." Terry didn't talk about anything. A second look at her made me realize something was definitely wrong. Phil and Terry joined us at the table, but Terry quickly excused herself, saying she needed to go to the restroom. Carlo casually asked Phil if everything was all right. Phil calmly replied, "Yes, it's fine, just maybe a little too much." He signaled to pour more, and the waiter brought a new round of drinks before the women returned. The nonverbal signs revealed true feelings. Connie's gaze conveyed anxiety, and Carlos subtly nudged me, hinting at hidden knowledge. He winked, confirming he knew something important. To ease the tension, we continued changing partners for a few more dances, but as we prepared to leave, I noticed Connie talking to Phil at the other end of the hall. This extra detail of the evening didn't escape my notice. I thought about asking her later, but changed my mind. After saying goodbye, we took separate taxis. Curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't resist asking about Phil and Terry the next day. "What happened to them?" I asked directly. She reassured me everything was fine, but as she looked out the window, I felt something was wrong. Not understanding what exactly was the matter, I decided to contact Carlo the next morning. That night, Connie tried to reassure me with closeness, reminding me of her love. However, an odd feeling persisted. Something was amiss, but I couldn't pinpoint it. "Darling, always remember that I love you too. You are my wife, and no one will ever separate us. I will never give you a reason to doubt it." Hugging her tightly, I showered her face with kisses, and we fell asleep. Yet the unusual events of that evening lingered in my mind. Realizing I needed to contact Carlo first thing in the morning, Connie went to the gym early the next day. Aimlessly wandering around, I drank refreshing orange juice, attempting to clear my clouded mind. Sitting at my laptop, I began searching for the hotel engraved on the pen handle in Connie's purse. After a thorough Google search, I discovered its location conveniently close, but on the other side of London. I noted down contact details, and my skepticism led me to study the hotel's history for potential clues. Unfortunately, my investigation yielded nothing significant. I was ready to leave. I called Carlo, expressing my concern about Phil and Terry. The unease in my voice must have been apparent as I asked, "What's up with Phil and Terry? Should I be worried?" Carlo suggested meeting at his brother's bar at noon to discuss it face-to-face, urging me to come alone. Assuring him, I agreed, and the call ended, leaving me with a growing sense of anxiety. As the day unfolded, I shared my plans with Connie, assuring her it wouldn't take long. Her curiosity led her to inquire, "What does he want to say?" The concern in her eyes mirrored the growing unease I felt. A sense of foreboding accompanied me as I drove to Carlo's house. Carlo greeted me and, without words, gestured for me to follow him. We navigated through the bar, entering utility rooms until we reached a secluded, office-like space. As we sat on opposite sides of a large oak table, Carlo's solemnity was palpable. He began, "I promised your father I'd always protect you, and I intend to keep that promise, but what I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear." The pain in his eyes heightened my apprehension, and my thoughts raced, anticipating the revelation's gravity. Carlo handed me a large manila envelope, emphasizing the weight of the moment. "Remember, I'm here for you, okay?" The deliberate movements and the suffering in his gaze hinted at the seriousness of what lay inside. Opening the envelope, glossy photos unfolded, revealing my wife in different poses with another man in a shabby hotel room. Shocked, I could hardly process the sight before me. Carlo's voice broke through my awareness haze as my marriage unraveled before my eyes. Tears streamed down my face and I locked eyes with Carlo, desperate for answers. How? When? Who is he? The torrent of emotions, shock, fear, and anger swirled within me as I clung to Carlo's promise of support in the midst of this unexpected storm. Carlo stammered, his voice trembling as he informed me about Connie's suspicious actions. He had heard rumors a few weeks ago, but only gathered concrete evidence recently. Before our recent date, he discovered some unsettling details. According to him, Connie was spotted in a restaurant in South London with a man who seemed overly friendly. The familiarity between them suggested a connection to Tony Drew, Phil's brother. Recalling our night walk, Carlo pointed out the exchanged glances between Phil, Connie, and Terry, which now made sense. Confirming my suspicions, he mentioned seeing Connie's pen from a hotel in London. I inquired if it had happened there, and Carlo nodded in agreement. Expressing my determination, I told Carlo that my assistant had been monitoring their actions since the beginning of the previous week. I wanted to confront the man face to face, but Carlo cautioned against rash actions that could lead to serious consequences. He advised divorcing Connie and leaving him to handle the situation. Rejecting his suggestion, I insisted on handling it personally and wanted information on the man's residence, workplace, and other details. Carlo acknowledged having the information in the envelope, but stressed the importance of careful planning to avoid legal consequences. He proposed a strategic approach to eliminate any possibility of ending up in prison and asked for my agreement on the plan. It seems the person in question is currently single but has been through a divorce. Even though he doesn't have kids, he seems to prefer women, especially those who are already married. Maybe he's not into commitments. What are your thoughts on this? How well do you get along with your friend Phil? Carlo asked. I'm asking because he behaved oddly at the restaurant where Terry and your wife were. I've been keeping a close eye on him and suspect he might be aware of what's happening. If that's true, can we still consider him a friend? I noticed that too, I replied, and I'm starting to suspect his wife is involved in this, judging by their behavior. I see no reason to continue being around them more than necessary. So I think we should end this as soon as possible. If this was an isolated incident, I might not have paid attention, but after seeing it, I can't forget about it. It's all too overwhelming. Every time I see her, these images will haunt me. No, I can't forgive or forget. I understand, Carlo said, but in the current situation, you should prioritize your own protection. Taking the time to plan ahead will be helpful, even if it requires some patience. Trust me, you're going to need retribution. I informed Carlo that I needed time to carefully consider the situation, expressing my desire for both Phil and Connie to suffer. Leaning in, Carlo placed a business card in front of me, explaining that it belonged to an experienced specialist who was already informed about my situation. He encouraged me to call the specialist and convey what needed to be done, assuring me that he was also our cousin. Carlo chuckled at the connection between the specialist and our family. We have cousins everywhere, he joked. I couldn't help but chuckle as well. We continued to discuss our plan for another hour until we decided on a course of action. I dialed Cousin Carl's number. We agreed to postpone its execution until all preparations were completed. Meanwhile, I had to find out the extent of Phil and his wife Terry's involvement in the situation. Leaving Carlo behind, I drove slowly back home. After parking the car, I went to the door, but there was no sound inside. Connie was not there. In the kitchen, I found a note on the table indicating that she had gone to Terry's. Understanding the message, I discarded the note and promptly contacted Carlo, informing him of Connie's claim. Despite her assertion, my surveillance revealed that Connie was currently at Phil and Terry's house, though Terry herself was absent. As mentioned earlier, I had someone keeping an eye on her, and he'd continue to do so. Later, 3 hours passed, and Connie finally returned home. Greeting me, she kissed my cheek and headed to the kitchen. When she inquired about my day, I mentioned Carlo's plan without divulging details. Observing her expectation for more information, after a minute of anticipation, she asked about the discussion. I replied that it concerned a cousin's personal file requiring permission and involved suspicions about a wife's behavior, seeking advice. Noticing the change in her expression, I smiled, acknowledging her attempt to appear nonchalant. Nevertheless, I reassured her that everything would be resolved in the end. She turned away, and the rest of the weekend dragged on slowly. Despite the strong desire, I could not bring myself to make love to her. I couldn't help but look at the photos that Carlo shared with me, where she is captured with Tony. I was surprised how she could continue a relationship with him and still behave completely normally around me. She had an exceptional talent for deception and acting, far surpassing all my ideas. Saturday night passed without any major problems, but on Sunday night, her body language made it clear that she wanted closeness. I kissed her gently, but the image of her with Tony wouldn't leave my mind, making me doubt that she really could only be mine. It felt like a betrayal. We both lay in bed in silence, lost in our thoughts. As soon as she fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed and went downstairs. I was sitting at my computer, immersed in work, when a message from Carlo caught my attention. Looking at my watch, I realized that it was about 1 a.m. Everything seemed to fall into place and completely coincided with our previous conversations. Feeling confident in my abilities, I came to the conclusion that now it remains only to plan a short trip with an overnight stay on Wednesday, and it will be possible to get down to business. I quickly replied to Carlo's message, confirming my agreement, but sleep did not come, and anger boiled inside me. In the morning, after a quick shower, I got dressed and went downstairs. Connie greeted me with a warm smile and served me a delicious breakfast, coffee, and toast. She settled into her seat and sipped her coffee delicately. I mentioned that I had to go to Leeds on Wednesday, and as I spoke, her eyes met mine over the rim of her cup. Sensing her thoughts, she casually inquired if I would only be gone for one night. I affirmed, but added that I wouldn't return until late Thursday night. Her gaze intensified as she asked if this was related to Carlo and the cousin I had mentioned, suggesting he might need support. Expressing my unease about Carlo, I admitted uncertainty regarding the kind of help he could provide. Reassuringly, she mentioned that I might be surprised, highlighting Carlo's formidable problem-solving abilities. Observing her pale expression, I realized she was actively formulating a plan in her mind. Glancing at my watch, I stood up from my seat, signaling the start of the workday. "It was time for me to leave, my dear. Take care of yourself and behave while I'm away," I said. I went to a meeting with a lawyer, discussed options for an hour, and signed the necessary documents. The lawyer already had copies of the envelope's contents. He assured me everything would be ready by Wednesday afternoon. Confirming our agreement, I hurried to the bank and moved all our savings to a new account in my name. Additionally, I sent a significant amount to Carlo, asking him to hold it for me. I left the current account alone, covering our bills, but we had almost no extra money. I emptied our safe deposit box of cash and jewelry, opening a separate account only in my name at another bank. I also decided to stop her allowance, thinking it would put her in a tough spot by the end of the month. Happy with my day, I entered my office and went about my usual work. Sadie, my secretary, was an invaluable assistant, handling work competently, maybe even more so than me. During a momentary break in signing documents, I noticed Sadie looking at me. Turning my chair, I faced her. We've known each other for almost 5 years. She's always been professional and devoted, though tension with Connie seemed present. I believed it was related to gender issues. Looking into Sadie's worried eyes, I realized I could no longer ignore the situation. The desire to confide in someone became overwhelming, and she sensed my inner turmoil. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my thoughts and informed her about potential disruptions this week. I emphasized that if I couldn't be there, she knew what needed to be done to ensure everything ran smoothly. She assured me of her support. Curious if she could assist further, Sadie turned around, a refined and intelligent woman of about 40 whom I trusted implicitly. Confessing to her, I revealed that Connie was cheating on me. Clearly taken aback, Sadie expressed her disbelief and asked if I had concrete evidence. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded in confirmation. Feeling my pain, Sadie hugged me tightly, providing the comfort and support that seemed absent at home. Tears streamed down for the first time since I received the devastating news a few days earlier. She held me until I regained my composure. Looking into my tear-filled eyes and reassuring me of my goodness, she encouraged me not to let anyone tell me otherwise. Concerned about my future plans, she inquired about my intentions. Determined, I stated my decision to file for divorce and end the relationship completely. Despite my hesitation, I made it clear that I didn't want to involve her or anyone else. Worried, Sadie urged me to be careful and pleaded for a promise not to do anything rash. The rest of the day felt like a drag, each moment seeming like hard work. Sadie's devotion and support were invaluable, turning her into a precious friend who stood by me during this challenging time. Her husband, whoever he was undoubtedly lucky. She fearlessly protected me from any threats, dealing with them with her usual flair. I heard her push someone away with a stern warning, making me smile. I was pleased to have kind-hearted people like her by my side. When I got home, sitting with Connie and watching TV, the phone rang. She took it to the hallway to answer. Although I heard her speaking softly, the conversation remained unintelligible. After about 5 minutes, she returned. Curious, I inquired about the phone call. Connie dismissed it as unimportant, mentioning Terry discussing her claims and Phil initiating another pointless argument with a hint of annoyance in her tone. "I hope they find a way to reconcile," she added. Sensing my confusion, I asked, "What do you mean? Are they in serious trouble?" Sensing my confusion, I asked, "What do you mean? Are they in serious trouble?" "Phil didn't say anything," Connie replied, carefully watching my expression. I searched for signs that might reveal the truth. "Well," she began hesitantly, "it's not really a serious crisis, more of a small disagreement. I'm sure they'll sort it out." Suddenly it dawned on me. "Is this really what happened when we were in the restaurant?" I asked. Connie looked at me nervously, not realizing I had noticed the tension between them and her role in it. While spinning a web of lies, it became noticeable that Connie was entangled in her own deception. Despite her discomfort, I couldn't figure out Terry and Phil's role in this situation. I remembered their intense communication during our walk, an argument boiling all evening. "So, that's what you talked to Phil about?" I asked, trying to figure out if she was trying to mediate. Connie's response was restrained and somewhat frank. "Yes, Terry asked me to talk to Phil, that's all." Intrigued, I continued to extract information. "What was it about, Connie? Perhaps I can help." A smile appeared when I saw my wife struggle with the tangled web of lies. Sensing her anxiety, she calmed me down. "It's all right, S. I'm sure they are close to solving their problems," she offered optimistically. Expressing relief, I acknowledged the good news about my friend's improving marriage. However, a sudden anxiety prompted me to ask if he was cheating. Connie swiftly reassured me that there was nothing of that sort. My curiosity lingered, leading me to inquire if Terry might be cheating. Sensing my curiosity, Connie suggested not getting involved and letting them figure it out. Fully agreeing, I remarked, "That's precisely what I had in mind. However, when I see Phil, I might check to ensure he's okay." As I shifted my attention back to the TV, Connie's narrowed eyes signaled the end of our discussion. After a few minutes, I revisited the topic, questioning, what was the conversation really about if neither of them was cheating? Unable to resist, Connie abruptly left the sofa, visibly agitated, and hurried out of the room. I sat and chuckled to myself. By now, I had enough information, but the other couple's role was still a mystery. The rest of the evening passed with mutual avoidance, and we both preferred silence to more discussion. Deciding to address the issue of Phil and Terry the next day, I woke up early on Tuesday. I left the house just as Connie was coming down the stairs, still looking a little puzzled. "I have to move. Lots to do before I leave tomorrow," I told her without staying long and headed for the garage. As I moved, my thoughts returned to recent events. Until last week, everything was relatively calm. That changed when Connie met Tony a few months ago during a night out with Terry. They were in a small club with friends when Tony walked in, offered to buy everyone a drink, and caught the girls' attention. During that meeting, Terry noticed a connection between Tony and Connie. Worried, Terry expressed concern about Tony's character to her friend. She advised her to stay away from him, mentioning that he had made advances towards her in the past. In an attempt to calm Terry, Connie reassured her, stating that she had her phone with her and noting that Tony was an attractive and smooth man. Terry shook her head, emphasizing her warning and urging Connie not to entertain the thought. Terry had done her duty as a protector, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something unsettling was behind Connie's eyes. The rest of the evening passed without any notable incidents, at least from Terry's point of view. Despite Terry's warning, Tony managed to get Connie's phone number. Over the next few days, Tony somehow got Connie's number and made several calls involving her in innocent conversations accompanied by light flirting. As the next bachelorette party approached, Connie realized that Tony would be attending again. This time, there was dancing, and as soon as Tony took her in his arms, he began to use seduction tactics, showering her with flattery and compliments. He began numerous subtle touches while they were talking. Leaving the club with Terry's worried friend, who scolded her and urged her to end it before something happened, Connie stubbornly kept silent, brushing off Terry's warnings and insisting that nothing had happened yet. But when Terry saw her, Tony just smiled resolutely, continuing to get his way, confident that he would eventually win Connie over. In the following weeks, phone conversations between Connie and Tony became more frequent, and their flirting intensified. Tony began to seriously pursue Connie. The dynamic changed when Terry was unable to join their usual night out, giving Tony the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was during one of their conversations that he saw a chance to make his move. Tony, using his charm, managed to convince Connie to meet him at the club, emphasizing that it would be a friendly relationship, nothing more. Connie thought about the idea and, seizing on a sudden opportunity, eagerly agreed to the meeting. Unlike her usual outfit for meeting Terry, Connie dressed up, feeling that this occasion had special meaning. Excitement bubbled in her veins. Overcoming any doubts she may have had, she couldn't hide her joy and she didn't want to. In her opinion, talking to Tony created a connection, and she was ready for the next step. Without slowing down, she grabbed her purse and headed for the front door. Unable to contain her excitement, that important evening marked the start of a new chapter in Connie and Tony's life. Their bond grew stronger, and meetings became more frequent. Their evening was filled with flirting, gentle touches, and playful dancing. Tony took her to his car and drove her to the Marriott Hotel, believing Connie was ready for the next step. They spent the night together, their passion lasting until almost 1 a.m. When Connie realized the time, panic set in. She quickly got ready and dressed, urging Tony to take her home. Despite Tony's agreement, the journey alone would have taken at least another 30 minutes. That night served as a wake-up call for Connie, and she started feeling uneasy. But in the following weeks, she continued dating Tony, unable to resist the temptation of their connection. During my absence, she stayed with Tony at the hotel, engaging in various activities. Terry advised Connie to stop before facing consequences. Weeks later, Terry discussed the situation with her husband, Phil, hoping he could influence Tony. Terry explicitly asked Connie to stop and talk to Tony, seeking Phil's support. Phil was torn between loyalty to his brother and me, making it increasingly difficult to find a solution without causing serious consequences. Connie knew their romance should end soon. She understood the risk she was taking increased the allure of continuing the illicit relationship. It was a dangerous game, and if anyone found out, chaos would follow. The recent restaurant incident, combined with leading questions, showed the situation was getting out of control. Connie understood Tony didn't have sincere feelings, considering her only as an opportunity. Despite this, she still felt drawn to him. Deciding that tomorrow would mark the last meeting and the end of the destructive cycle, Connie made up her mind, intending to end it after one final night together. Despite the decision, she still had to convince Tony. Late at night, legal documents from the lawyer were prepared in her car. Feeling tense, I sought solace in my trusted bottle of whiskey. Observing Connie, it was clear she grappled with her problems. When she inquired about my well-being, I didn't immediately respond. Instead, I turned to her, meeting her eyes to gauge her reaction. She seemed scared and anxious, evidently affected by the events of the past day. I muttered that it had been a tough day and mentioned the need to shower for the upcoming meeting with Carlo. The mention of Carlo appeared to disturb her, carrying a sense of horror. After the shower, I went downstairs, catching Connie's gaze in the kitchen. Casually asking about dinner, she suggested ordering takeout, expressing her reluctance to cook. I agreed, and we settled on Chinese cuisine. I called and placed the order, and while waiting, we sat in the living room with the TV on. Dinner passed quietly, almost in suspense. Connie casually inquired about my departure time the next morning, to which I explained my plan to leave around 9 in the morning for an 11 flight. I added that the issue couldn't be addressed until the evening, and that it would be an opportunity to finally meet cousin Carlo, trying to find a positive aspect in the current situation. Acknowledging the importance of family, Connie looked at me with a hint of sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was contemplating that tomorrow could mark the end of it all. The next morning, I woke up to the delightful smell of freshly brewed coffee, a scent I always appreciated at the start of the day. While I sipped the hot coffee, which served as a magical elixir that fully awakened me, Connie was preparing breakfast. I sat down at the table and began to eat toast, my stomach still feeling heavy from last night's dinner. Silence filled the kitchen while we both enjoyed coffee. A calm atmosphere prevailed. We exchanged fleeting glances, but quickly averted our eyes to avoid giving ourselves away. The atmosphere was tense, and we both wanted it to be over. Checking my watch, I realized it was time to leave. Urgently, I mentioned that I had to go and pick up Carlo from home. As I passed Connie, she looked at me with a smile and wished me a safe journey and a speedy return. Moving forward, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, and tears welled up in my eyes. With a deep sigh of relief, I turned the steering wheel and drove away from my wife, deciding not to look back. My face was flooded with tears, and my heart was heavy with grief. It was a day of reckoning, the culmination of it all. A few minutes later, Connie picked up the phone and listened to the beeps in her ear. She whispered that I was gone and asked if the plan could still proceed that night. The response was affirmative, with assurances of making the night unforgettable. Connie explained that she had convinced Phil to leave them alone and shared that he was becoming increasingly upset with her. She inquired if he had mentioned anything to me, and the answer was affirmative, but she had instructed him to mind his own business. Despite the challenges, she expressed eagerness for the night ahead and shared the arrangements for their meeting at the same room as last time. Ending the call, the man couldn't help but smile. He quickly composed a text message with the details of the lovers' date, collected his listening equipment, and left the place of observation. Carlo looked at the message, a grim smile appearing on his face. He expressed concern about the situation and questioned my certainty about it. I assured him of my love for Connie and my determination to make her understand the gravity of her actions, even if it meant enduring lasting consequences with her lover. With some time before the action started, we decided to have a snack. Carlo dissuaded me from reaching out to Terry and Phil, emphasizing the potential legal consequences if they became aware of my awareness. He assured me that there would be time to address that later and asked me not to worry. Leaving the bar, I was introduced to Carlo's brother Alfredo and his daughter Alicia. Alfredo apologized for his daughter's impulsive nature and explained that they can be assertive these days. Expressing understanding, I greeted Alfredo warmly, emphasizing the importance of family. Alfredo smiled and conveyed his regards to his wife and the rest of his family. A little after 3 in the afternoon, an incoming call signal was heard on my mobile phone. Glancing at the screen, I noticed that it was Connie. I greeted her and asked what had happened. She explained that she called to ensure I had arrived safely and inquired if everything was okay. I assured her that we were both fine and mentioned that we were having a late lunch before continuing on our way. Curious about her evening plans, I asked about her intentions, subtly concealing my true agenda. She mentioned that she was going to visit Terry and believed everything was fine there. I responded, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Continuing the conversation, I casually mentioned that I was planning to call Phil later, as I believed he was going out with his brother. Expressing curiosity about Phil's brother, I inquired about his personality. Connie offered a vague response, mentioning that she had only met him once but found him to be somewhat similar to Phil. With a brief farewell, I explained that we needed to check into the hotel before our evening meeting. Wishing her a pleasant evening and asking her to say hello to Terry, I ended the call. I looked at Carlo, and he sensed the hidden pain in my expression. He offered his support, acknowledging that it was done, and suggested we go meet the others. Leaving Alfredo at the bar, we proceeded to the private rooms, where Carlo introduced me to a group of 4 people familiar to him. He assured me of their trustworthiness, emphasizing that they had proven themselves countless times in the past. At that moment, Carlo's phone rang, and after answering the call, he nodded, relaying the message that we would be leaving in 5 minutes. Observing my watch, I noticed it was already 8. Time was slipping away fast. The guys left the room and headed to the waiting car. They grabbed a minibus to reach their destination. At the same time, Carlo and I went out the back door and hopped into the prepared Mercedes. This is how my story brought me to where I am now. We parked the Mercedes on a quiet street, just 200 meters from the hotel. In silence, we sat there, and by 9 in the evening, Carlo's phone signaled a message. After confirming the team's arrival and placement, we stayed silent until another message appeared on Carlo's phone, indicating that the exit was guarded. "Okay, let's go," Carlo said, breaking the silence. After a moment, I followed suit, and we headed for the hotel lobby. Time seemed to have sped up. My heart raced with anticipation. Carlo got out of the car first and directed me to the indicated room number. Reaching door 415, a feeling nagged at me that my wife might be behind it with another man. Just as we reached the door, 4 men in hotel-style uniforms seemed to appear out of nowhere. Glancing around the corridor, relieved it was empty, Carlo warned about the nearby CCTV cameras. Leading the team into the bedroom, Carlo's determined eyes met mine. The lights turned on, revealing a scene that left my heart sinking. From my vantage point, I could see my wife in bed with Tony, oblivious to the impending intrusion. The details of what happened to her lover are hard to convey in this context. Everything unfolded in a whirlwind of emotions. Turning on the light, I entered the room. My wife, lying on the bed, locked eyes with me. Shuddering, she tightly shielded herself, tears streaming down her face. Muffled sobs and unintelligible mutterings escaped her mouth. Love and hate collided, and rage took the forefront among the overwhelming feelings. Carlo stepped forward, gripping my arm and gently taking an object from my hand. His determined eyes met mine, urging me to calm down and gain control of my emotions. At this moment, Connie, consumed by fear, stared at the 2 imposing figures in front of her, shaking her head vigorously. Tears streamed down her face as she remained wordless, intensifying the destruction of her evening. Sensing it was time to leave, I observed a subtle movement from Carlo, who was checking his phone. He mentioned that it was time for us to depart. Following him out of the room and leaving Connie behind, Carlo remarked that I had handled the situation well. He added that, for a moment, he thought I might lose control of my anger. I responded with a grim laugh, assuring him that, so far, it was just a good scare. The real lesson will be when she meets Tony again, I explained, and there's no need for me to get my hands dirty since the guys will handle him properly. Carlo understood my desire for Tony to know I was there, but assured me that Tony wouldn't forget the experience anytime soon. As we walked through dimly lit streets towards our destination, Carlo mentioned that rooms were ready for both of us when we were ready. We entered the bar, where Alfredo awaited us. Approaching, in the morning, Carlo's phone beeped with a message, confirming that everything was settled. Expressing my gratitude for what they did, I started to muse, but Carlo interrupted me, stating that it was over and I needed to figure out the situation with her. Understanding his point, no further words were exchanged. The weight of the situation pressed on me. As we left her at the hotel, I wondered how she would find her way home and what she would say about this unexpected turn of events. Now aware that I knew about her actions, would she admit to them or remain silent? Despite catching her in the act, I doubted she would willingly confess. Carlo's words brought me back. Rooms are prepared for both of you when you are ready. Unable to sleep, I replayed the events of the previous night in my mind, thinking through every detail. Thoughts of Connie filled my mind, and a heavy sadness settled within me. She was the love of my life, my everything, and now it's all been destroyed. The only way left was to face her and see how this would unfold. Divorce papers were already in my hands, with the official copy supposed to be delivered today. Returning home, she wouldn't have doubts about what I knew. A chilling thought crossed my mind. What if she doesn't come home? Uncertainty added complexity to an already turbulent situation. Now that she knew I caught her at the hotel, Connie would likely be afraid to return home. I realized I needed to take measures, possibly rescheduling the delivery of the divorce papers to wherever she could find refuge, maybe with Terry. Almost 7 hours had passed when Alicia abruptly woke me, informing me it was lunchtime and that I had 30 minutes. Carlo mentioned I had to catch an afternoon flight, so it was time to get up. Getting dressed, I saw a changed version of myself in the mirror, bearing the weight of recent events and signs of change. Sitting down with the others at the table, I sensed that the feeling of normality had turned surreal, yet oddly comforting. We shared a meal, talked, and even laughed. But time passed too quickly, and it was soon time to leave. Gathering our belongings, we headed to the waiting car. As we drove away, I gazed out the window, bidding farewell to the faces watching us. On the way home, I drove steadily and calmly. I dropped off Carlo, and Joanna welcomed him with joy, hugging him tightly like newlyweds. She then turned to me, offering a tight hug for comfort. Carlo reassured me, expressing his belief that everything would eventually be fine. Despite my speechlessness, his comforting hug offered a glimmer of hope. Departing with a plan to call later, I nodded in confirmation and drove home, attempting to avoid dwelling on empty thoughts. Upon reaching my front door and entering, an eerie silence pervaded the house. The heating provided warmth, but the cozy atmosphere was absent. With cautious steps, I explored the living room and kitchen, noting the emptiness and quietness. Checking my mobile phone, I found no calls or messages from Connie. Overwhelmed with disappointment and sadness, I sank into a chair in the living room. A photo of Connie and me on the mantel caught my eye, sparking anger. I impulsively threw the framed photo across the room as it crashed against the wall. The phone rang. With apprehension and curiosity, I answered the call, still carrying a residual tone of anger. "Hello," I responded. A hesitant female voice on the other end identified herself as Terry. Despite my harsh tone, she inquired about Connie, revealing that Connie was with her, upset and afraid to go home. Suppressing my anger, I asked Terry to let Connie talk to me. Advising Terry to ask Connie about the events, I listened as the conversation unfolded. After a while, Terry returned to the phone, expressing genuine concern for Connie, who remained silent. I instructed Terry to tell Connie that I would pick her up. In the background, I heard Connie scream, confirming my suspicions. Terry, uncertain of what to say, stammered, and I calmly acknowledged that I knew everything. Apologizing, Terry shared her unsuccessful attempts to stop the events with Phil. Expressing my sadness over the situation, I mentioned the impact on our friendship, but suggested avoiding further discussion. In response, Terry whispered an understanding acknowledgement and apologized once again. I took a deep breath, attempting to find some semblance of completeness in the midst of turmoil. With gratitude, I thanked Terry, acknowledging that our once strong friendship had been irreparably changed by the actions of those involved. Ending the conversation, I informed Terry that I wouldn't be coming for Connie, advising her to relay the message. I sternly instructed Terry that Connie's belongings would be packed and ready for her to collect, with a warning that any delay would result in disposal. Emphasizing that Connie no longer lived with me, I mentioned that some papers for her would be delivered to my address and urged caution in any actions or attempts to contact me. I stressed the need for careful consideration. Clearly and with strength, I spoke to Terry, laying out all the details and emphasizing that I hadn't heard from Connie since around 7:30 p.m. I anticipated some reaction after she received the documents, but according to Terry, Connie appeared very nervous when she arrived at their house. Carlo, finding humor in the situation, grinned, thinking about the upcoming day. I mentally listed tasks that needed attention. First, contacting my office to clarify work matters, then dealing with a locksmith, addressing banking issues, and handling logistics. Painful as it was to admit, the trust we once shared had completely vanished. Remaining in this relationship after the divorce papers were delivered last night was impossible. I expected to hear from Connie today, once she gathered her thoughts. But it was already 9 when a knock interrupted my thoughts. Upon opening the door, I found Terry and Phil standing there. Their unexpected presence cast a shadow in the room. Waiting in silence, Terry eventually spoke, expressing remorse for their actions. Acknowledging their request to come in, I gestured toward the living room. As they settled on the sofa, I took a chair, bracing myself for the necessary conversation. Curious, I asked, "So, what did you guys want to discuss?" Paying close attention to Terry and Phil, I listened as Phil began with an apology, admitting his failure to inform me about Connie's extramarital pursuits. Terry echoed his sentiments, expressing regret for being unable to reach Connie and prevent her actions. While their words evoked a sense of offense and betrayal, I recognized the sincerity behind their apologies. Wanting clarity, I questioned Terry about her statement that Connie didn't understand anything. Confused and concerned, I asked, "What do you mean, Terry? I was away on Wednesday, and when I called, Connie mentioned being left by Tony at a hotel. Are you suggesting something happened between them?" Phil, filled with concern, replied, "We're not certain. We tried contacting my brother, but there's been no response. Connie is unable to provide much information. All she said was that she felt tied up and that Tony had left her at the hotel." The growing anxiety within me intensified as I struggled to comprehend the events between Connie and Tony. Pressing for more details, I directed my disappointment toward Phil. "Come on, Phil," I urged. "She must have shared more than that. What happened? Clearly something went wrong. Did he misuse her?" Phil and Terry exchanged surprised glances, taken aback by the intensity of my anger. Summoning my strength, I redirected the conversation. I inquired about Connie's well-being after the delivery of the divorce papers. Terry affirmed this, describing Connie's emotional turbulence and the new outburst triggered by the documents. Connie's state of confusion and imbalance deeply affected her, intensifying my anger and fear for what traumatic events she might be withholding. Expressing my frustration, I asserted, "Well, she brought this upon herself. If she's hurting now, then so be it." Terry and Phil, taken aback by my intense anger, attempted to reason with me. Terry, with a cracking voice, urged me to consider reconciliation, emphasizing the severity of divorce and suggesting that I talk to Connie first. As I listened to Terry's plea, my anger began to wane, replaced by conflicting emotions. The decision ahead demanded careful consideration and open communication. Recognizing Terry's sincere concern as that of a true friend, I admitted to liking her despite their involvement. Terry's words compelled a serious approach. Deep down, I acknowledged that facing Connie was inevitable. Taking a deep breath, I decided, "All right, Terry, I will talk to her, but only after her belongings are removed from our house. It will be just her and me. I'll call her and provide details about when and where this conversation will take place. How does that sound?" Terry, overwhelmed with emotion, hugged me tightly, and I noticed Phil's confused and regretful expression. Expressing gratitude to Terry for her understanding, I assured her, "Thank you, Terry. I will contact her soon. Please ask her to wait for my call, and don't worry, I won't leave her in limbo for long." Phil, conveying regret, muttered sympathetically, "Sal, I'm sorry. My brother certainly deserved a good thrashing from you. I wouldn't blame you if you did." Observing Terry and Phil leave from the window, their hurried departure indicated their destination, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Lost in thought, I contemplated Terry's words, realizing there was some truth in them. It was time to talk to Connie, and this conversation could no longer be postponed. Feeling detached from the current situation, I sought solace in a conversation with my longtime friend Sadie. Our discussion lasted for half an hour, during which I attentively listened as Sadie shared details of her successful life without my presence. She truly was an extraordinary woman. When she touched on Connie's topic, her tone changed to that of a concerned mother. It felt like listening to my own mother's lectures. In the end, Sadie insisted I have dinner at her house tonight with her husband. Feeling somewhat obligated, I reluctantly agreed to her request. The rest of the day involved various changes. Locks were replaced, rooms were rearranged, clothes were packed or discarded, and photos were reorganized or destroyed. Each action symbolized moving forward and parting with the past. As evening approached, I found myself lost in thought, gazing out of the window and contemplating the task that lay ahead. Understanding the need to gather my strength for what awaited, I decided to postpone making the call until the morning. Feeling a sense of weariness, another restless night followed, offering no relief from the weight of anxious thoughts. In the early morning, just before 7:30, an unexpected call disrupted the silence. Phil's voice came through, delivering news about Tony's condition. Apparently, Tony had been in the hospital for several days, injured but in stable condition. The news had a minimal effect on my emotions, and my response carried a cold detachment. I made it clear to Phil that I harbored no sympathy for Tony, stating, "I hope you don't expect sympathy from me, Phil." As far as I understand, he was lucky that our paths did not cross. I don't have the slightest desire to show him any respect. Phil seemed to accept the frankness of my words and acknowledge the justified anger I felt toward Tony. He refrained from asking certain questions, recognizing the depth of my emotions. Expressing remorse for not being as good a friend to me as I had been to him, Phil conveyed his understanding of the irreparable past. I reassured him that it was not his fault and expressed gratitude for informing me about Tony. After bidding farewell and expressing love to Terry, Phil concluded the call. Placing the phone back on the stand, I turned my attention to the view outside the window. Contemplating the garden, I enjoyed the silence and reflected on the unfolding events. A calm atmosphere enveloped me as I observed random birds flying to the feeder and feasting on the seeds I happily supplied them. Watching the serene communion with nature through the glass always brought me a sense of calm. It was at such moments, immersed in the beauty of the natural world, that my thoughts could flow freely. Dialing Carlo's number on my mobile phone, I shared the news about Tony. His response was brief, but filled with a sense of satisfaction. He noted that the work was done well. Setting the phone aside, I took a sip of the coffee in my hand, relishing the aromas of the day. Soon the phone rang again, disrupting the peaceful atmosphere. This time I decided to let the answering machine handle it. Listening carefully, I heard Connie's trembling voice leaving a message, filled with uncertainty and emotion. "I'm sorry, but I have to explain. I need you. I need to get home. I'm so sorry." Connie's desperate plea echoed in the voicemail. Sobs interrupted her words, penetrating my soul and making my heart ache in my chest. Each tearful phrase caused a shockwave of emotions, leaving me breathless. When the message ended, I found myself breathing heavily, contradictory thoughts spinning in my head. I knew that today I would have to solve this situation, but I wanted her to wait so that she would understand that my decision was made not only in response to her message, it had to be a carefully thought-out decision. For the next few hours, I wandered aimlessly around the house, lost in deep thought. The once familiar rooms now seemed empty, emphasizing the void that had formed after Connie's absence. In place of her belongings, there were spaces that served as visual reminders of our life together. I contacted Sadie and asked for help from several people with a van to move all of Connie's things. Within an hour, the boxes and bags I packed were neatly loaded into the back of the van. I watched the car pull away, setting off to return Connie's things. Soon, I was expecting my phone to buzz with a notification about the delivery of her belongings. This marked the final completion of the one-way trip, the final stage of our life together. Terry called to inform me about the delivery of Connie's belongings. I expressed brief gratitude for the organization, feeling a sense of completeness. Terry updated me, mentioning that they stored most items in the warehouse, keeping only the ones I had marked as personal. Asked whether I would talk to Connie, I firmly instructed Terry to call her as I awaited Connie's response. My tone remained controlled but firm when I spoke to her. I interrupted her attempt to apologize, stating, "Leave it alone, Connie. Now you have answers to questions you never asked yourself when you were busy with other things." Despite her desperate pleas, I made it clear that we had nothing more to discuss. Firmly, I stated, "This is where our journey ends. Do you really think you can tell me anything to help me deal with this?" Connie continued to plead, asking to come home and talk. Prepared to listen, though unable to promise anything, I responded with fatigue in my voice. "I'll listen, but I can't promise anything." I concluded the conversation, carrying the weight of her words in my memory. Her voice held pain, and I wondered if she could sense the suffering in mine. Leaning back in my chair, I reflected on our marriage and the happiness I thought we shared. Doubt crept in, questioning how well I knew her and whether my assumptions about our relationship were too idealistic. Delving into introspection, I realized I might still have a lot to learn about the person I thought I knew closely. Although I didn't suspect anything until that fateful night, it dawned on me that Connie might have engaged in similar behavior before. Taking a deep breath, I decided to approach the upcoming meeting with restrained emotion, mentally preparing for what might be the last act of our marriage. The doorbell announced Connie's arrival, and nervously, I opened the door. Time seemed to stop. It was our first meeting after that solemn night at the hotel, and the shock resonated within me as she entered the living room. A thin sigh escaped her lips, replaced by a strangled sob. She noticed the empty spaces on the walls, devoid of photos and cherished souvenirs that once adorned our life together. Standing in front of me, covering her mouth with her hand, tears welled in her eyes. I stated coldly, bitterness in my voice, "Everything is gone." Pointing out the emptiness throughout the house, Connie expressed confusion. I reiterated that I never wanted this to happen. She pleaded, her voice shaking with remorse. I acknowledged that her actions had consequences, the result of her infidelity, extramarital affair, and connection with another man. In the ensuing silence, Connie sat down on the sofa. With a stern expression, I pressed her to speak. She apologized, expressing regret and admitting her inability to resist, describing it as independency. Struggling with emotions, I wondered if there was still room in my heart for forgiveness. I then revealed that I had talked to Terry and Phil, gaining a fuller understanding of what happened, and expressing frustration with the lack of clarity on why it happened. She shifted uncomfortably, looking down at her feet, admitting that she couldn't answer why she got involved with a new and exciting person. I argued about the undeniable fact that she slept with him, consistently expressing my resentment and disappointment over the course of several weeks. Connie, laden with guilt, acknowledged that she messed up and expressed a desire to find a way to move past it. Changing the topic, I inquired about the whereabouts of the person she was involved with. Connie denied referring to him as her lover, explaining that she went on dates with him but emphasizing her love for me and apologizing tearfully for her terrible mistake. Listening to her plea, anger boiled inside me as I questioned her sincerity and trustworthiness. I pointed out her deceitful actions and questioned why I should believe anything she said. Connie, recognizing the extent of my pain and betrayal, continued crying, realizing the precarious state of our relationship. Demanding to know if I had communicated with my counterpart, I harshly questioned her, waiting for her answer. She tearfully revealed that she hadn't heard anything about him and expressed her reluctance to know more, considering him the one who ruined her life. Noticing the missing wedding photo, Connie walked around the room, observing the void left by the absence of memories. Emotionally drained, she sank onto the sofa, acknowledging the irreversible loss. The silence between us reflected the vast gap created by her actions. Pleading for a chance and expressing a note of defeat but hope in her eyes, Connie asked if there was really no chance for reconciliation. Taking a deep breath, I met her gaze, conveying a mix of suffering and resilience. Declaring that her betrayal shattered my heart and constituted disrespect for our feelings and those of our friends, I asserted that our marriage was over. I left her to face the consequences of her choices, urging her to sign the divorce papers and leave. Expressing finality and fatigue, I stated that everything ended with her, instructing her to leave my house in the city for peace. Sitting dejectedly, Connie absorbed my words and slowly stood to leave. I followed her to the door, watching as she opened her car door. When she looked back and apologized, mixed emotions stirred in me. Closing the door, I sealed not only her exit but also the end of our marriage. 2 days later, Carlo informed me that Connie had left the country, escorted by his people. Realizing she wouldn't find peace in the city, I felt a sense of closure.
Story 2.
My husband took my dad's business and left me without inheritance due to a small mistake I made. I'm not someone who typically spends time on specific X websites, but one July night a few months ago, I not only viewed their content but also signed up for their premium membership. I thought $100 was a reasonable price. I was watching a live stream featuring an attractive woman. While I've seen better, there was something about this scene that deeply affected me. The woman was referred to as Hot Housewife Jenna, but I knew her real name was Kelly. It turns out Kelly was my wife. After their closeness, Kelly's partner commented, "Well, darling, that was quite enjoyable. I bet your husband can't make you happy like that, can he?" Kelly, or Hot Housewife Jenna, smiled at him and replied promptly, "Well, Mario, that was indeed enjoyable, but just so you know, no one ignites my passion like my husband. I've been with a few men, but none of them make me as happy as he does. You're good, but he's incredible, so don't stop trying harder." She flashed him another grin. Confused, Mario asked, "If he's so fantastic, why are you cheating on him by being here and letting me be with you?" Kelly maintained her grin and responded, "I didn't plan for it to happen, but I enjoy the excitement. I'm glad you're part of it. I also do it because I can get away with it, and he'll never find out. I truly love my husband with all my heart, and after 3 nights here, I've realized how much better he is than what I get here. It makes me love and appreciate him even more." As I mentioned earlier, that $100 was well spent because I could see what was happening with my beloved wife without the need for costly surveillance equipment or private investigators. You're probably wondering how I ended up here, what led to that night when I visited this site. It's a valid question, and I suppose the most honest answer would be a stroke of luck, a rare twist of fate that came my way. Not luck that my wife was involved with Mario, but rather that I now knew she was being unfaithful. Kelly and I have been married for just over 8 years. We first met during our elementary school days. We both grew up in the vicinity of a small town in central Illinois while she lived in town. I resided in the countryside. Her father owned the largest grain elevator in the area, and my father possessed the largest grain farm. Because our parents conducted business together, it was only natural that we would meet, attend school together, and become friends. I won't bore you with stories of grade school crushes, high school romances, or even our college experiences. Both of us dated and, yes, had relationships with other people. We hadn't committed exclusively to each other, but deep down, I suppose we both knew we should be a couple. I happened to be her first, but along the way, there were others for both of us. It was during our junior year at the University of Illinois when we decided to be exclusive, and later on, I asked her to marry me. About a year and a half after that, just 1 week after graduating, we tied the knot. We both earned degrees in business administration. Life was great, or at least I thought it was, until that fateful July night. But let me continue. 3 years ago, Kelly's parents retired and relocated to Phoenix, Arizona. Kelly, her sister Amber, and her two brothers, Tom and Carl Gentry, bought a 48% stake in the grain business from their father. Tom Sr., he wished to maintain controlling interest for a few years to provide financial support for their growth. Eventually, he decreased his stake until they owned the business entirely. Amber is married to a friend of mine, Walter Swanson, known as Wall E., who's also a grain farmer. He manages a farm just slightly smaller than mine. We live nearby and enjoy spending time with them. Tom and Carl jointly manage the grain business, while Kelly serves as the controller, handling the financial aspects. Amber works at the facility, dealing with customers and managing grain sales transactions. It's a true family-run business with a few additional employees, primarily truck drivers and grain handlers. During the peak harvest season, they hire a few part-time workers as well. That's enough background. Let's delve into the unfortunate story of how I discovered my wife engaging with another man online and what unfolded afterward. All four of the Gentry children put in a tremendous effort to finalize the deal for the grain business purchase from their father. While I wasn't heavily involved, I knew they had to work diligently to make it happen. There were meetings with banks, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, insurers, and many more. They were all quite exhausted after completing the deal. Thankfully, all of this occurred during the winter, which was the slowest season for them. For me, it was after the harvest season, so I didn't require Kelly's assistance on the farm as much as I would during my two busiest times of the year. While she didn't participate in the actual farming work, managing 2,200 acres of corn and soybeans kept me extremely busy during those times, and I relied on Kelly for running errands and various tasks. So, since our schedules weren't hectic, Kelly and Amber decided they wanted to take a few days off and go to a spa to relax and unwind. They booked a spa for a 3-night getaway. The ladies returned from their spa retreat feeling relaxed and rejuvenated. They decided to repeat the experience that July, once the planting season was over. The following year, they scheduled another weekend at the spa. It was during this particular spa visit that I came across the online video. Dan Marvel, the field agent for the Illinois Department of Agriculture in our county, happened to stop by during a routine tour of his area of responsibility. Kelly and I had known Dan since college, and when he inquired about her, I mentioned that she was on a getaway at PE Spa. Dan gave me a curious look and mentioned that something strange was happening there, something I might want to investigate. He explained that a cousin of his used to work at that spa as a masseuse and had shared some rather scandalous stories about what went on there. He mentioned there was a website with a different name, possibly related to pleasures, although he was hesitant to go into details. He suggested I look into it. I'm an internet enthusiast who enjoys browsing for interesting content, so that evening I decided to explore and eventually stumbled upon PE Spa. Finding the live feed was quick, and the show began. I could recount the events of that night, but what's the point? I experienced hurt, tears, anger, depression, and a whirlwind of emotions a man typically goes through when discovering his wife's infidelity. I soon discovered it wasn't the first time she had cheated, because PE Spa had an archive section, and I was able to access videos from their previous 2 visits, along with videos from the 2 previous nights that Kelly and Amber had been there. With a premium membership, I had the option to download each video for an extra $20 per video. In total, I downloaded 8 videos at a cost of $160. For a total of $260, I had all the evidence I'd ever need to file for divorce from my wife. I just hadn't figured out my plan yet, but I knew I had to start immediately. I wouldn't wait for a month, 2 weeks, or even a single week to take action. In my mind, the sooner we separated, the better. I had video proof that she had closeness with another man at least 8 times. In fact, she had closeness with at least 2 different men, Mario and Steve, in the videos I had downloaded. I didn't know, and frankly, I didn't care if there had been more than 2 men involved. 2 was more than enough. I created several DVD copies of the videos and stored them in a highly secure location. When my father built our house, he installed a wall safe accessible through a hidden panel in the built-in bookcase in the office. Once the copies were safely hidden, I removed all references to Nature's Pleasure Spa from my computer and deleted all the original files. Aside from the DVD copies, there was no longer a trace of the evidence. With everything sorted, I picked up my cell phone and sent a text message to Kelly on her cell phone. "Kelly, this is Jack. I happen to know exactly what you're doing at PE Spa, and I have evidence to prove it. Don't bother returning to the house if you decide to come back at all. This house is no longer your home, and soon I won't be your husband. We're done. My lawyer will get in touch with you in the next few days. Arrangements can be made for you to collect your personal belongings at that time." It appeared that Kelly had turned off her cell phone and didn't receive my text message until the next morning, as I didn't hear anything from her that night. However, early the following day, my phone started ringing. I could see from the caller ID that it was Kelly, so I chose not to answer. Shortly after, she left me a voicemail. "Jack, what on earth are you talking about, honey? I have no idea what's going on there, but why would you send me such terrible messages? Amber and I are packing up now, and I'll be home in a couple of hours. I don't understand what you think I did, but you're mistaken. I'll talk to you when I get there, and then we can sort this out. I love you, Jack." Shortly after, my cell phone rang once more, and again I chose not to answer it, letting it go to voicemail. It was essentially the same message, almost word for word. I couldn't help but wonder if she had prepared what she was going to say when I ignored the call. It didn't take long for another text message to arrive. She seemed like a broken record as she repeated nearly the exact words from her 2 phone messages. Since I didn't have to have an actual conversation with her, I decided to send her a brief reply via text to confirm that I had received her messages but had opted not to talk to her. I simply texted her, "I wonder if Mario would have any idea about what in the world are you talking about, honey, if I asked him. Why don't you have him call me and I will ask him?" What I said about not coming back to the house, I meant, "Do not think you can come home. It's over, Kelly." I didn't receive any more texts, but later that afternoon, I got another phone call from Kelly. She left a message. "Jack, we need to talk. I'm staying with Amber until you and I can have a conversation and resolve this terrible misunderstanding. Please call my cell phone and talk to me." Update: the next morning I visited my bank and set up a second safe deposit box in my name alone. I placed 1 copy of the DVDs in that box, along with the original prenuptial agreement. I had also created an extra copy of the prenuptial agreement since I had a meeting with my lawyer scheduled for 11:00 a.m. While I was confident that my lawyer already had a copy, I didn't want to leave anything to chance. When the time came, I entered my lawyer's office, and to my surprise, Kelly was already there. She appeared disheveled, her eyes showing signs of crying, and her hair in disarray. Kelly told me, "Jack, we need to discuss this." I inquired, "How did you know I had an appointment here?" She replied, "Richard called me when you set up the meeting." At that moment, Richard Warner, my attorney, emerged from his office and invited both of us to enter. My anger simmered beneath the surface, so I retorted, "No, Richard, we won't be going into your office together. Your call to Kelly has shattered my trust, and I need a clear answer from you right now." I asked pointedly, "Will you represent me? Only me?" Lawyers are supposed to be intelligent, but it seems this guy missed out on a fair share of brains because he stated, "No, Jack, if this continues, I will be representing Kelly." As it turned out, he considered the grain business a better client than my farming business. Perhaps this was due to his representation of the Gentry family members involved in the grain business. I held my own view on this matter, believing that he would eventually realize the mistake in his judgment. "Fine, Richard. Please ensure that all my original documents and any available copies of contracts and paperwork are in your possession and made available to me by 4 p.m. today. I will either pick them up myself or arrange for a courier to retrieve them." I added, "I want you to understand that I've appreciated your past work for me, however you're making a significant error here, Richard. I'll be seeking legal services elsewhere, and my new attorney will contact you soon." Kelly had remained silent throughout this exchange, but then asked in a pleading tone, "Jack, why won't you talk to me now to clear this up?" I responded, "Because, Kelly, it's evident that Richard values you as a client more than he values me. I won't engage in this conversation with you without legal representation, and I don't trust him." Richard chimed in, saying, "Jack, you know I've always been straightforward with you, so you have nothing to fear." In my mind, I thought, "Oh, Richard, I have plenty to fear. You can't serve 2 masters, as they say, and it's clear whom you've chosen to prioritize. Besides, you've already demonstrated your untrustworthiness when you called Kelly in here. Goodbye. My attorney will be in touch," I declared, and as I walked out, I could hear Kelly beginning to cry again. Darn it, now I had to find a new attorney. Well, I knew that David Warner was a very skilled attorney and had a strong competitive streak against Richard Warner. I thought that might be a good choice, but I didn't want to rush into it without some research. Attorneys, accountants, bankers, and insurance agents are professionals you closely associate with, and you need to be absolutely sure about them before getting involved. I understood that attorney-client relationships are highly important because they often involve confidential information. Since I knew a few people who had used David's services, I called his law office and asked if they could provide a list of references. The secretary said they did indeed have a list and was happy to send it to me via email. On the list, I noticed there were 4 friends of mine, so I decided to visit 3 of them and get their opinions on David's work. It didn't take much time because all 3 of them quickly gave me glowing recommendations for David. I had no doubt that he would handle my case well. I skipped visiting the fourth friend, Wally, because he's married to Amber, Kelly's sister, and I didn't want to involve him. I called David's office a second time, introduced myself, and asked if I could schedule a meeting with him after 4 p.m. The receptionist informed me that he was busy until 4:30 p.m., but would check with him to see if he could meet with me after that. I knew there was a chance he might not be available, but I had to give it a shot. When she got back on the line, she told me that Mr. Warner would meet with me at 4:30 p.m., but it would have to be a brief meeting because he had other commitments in the evening. I agreed to that and mentioned I would arrive shortly before 4:30 p.m. She replied, "I look forward to seeing you at that time, Mr. Hagen. By the way, my name is Samantha. I am David's wife." At 4 p.m., I swung by Richard's office to collect my paperwork, but they hadn't finished copying it all. It was evident they were stalling, probably hoping I'd change my mind. I must admit I lost my temper and told them that I needed every piece of my legal paperwork within the next 15 minutes. Otherwise, my new attorney would be reaching out to them. They asked who that might be, and I told them they'd find out soon enough. That office became really busy after that. I believe they had 3 people making copies all at once, and 20 minutes later, I had every sheet. I still had enough time to make it to David's office for my appointment, so I didn't complain further about being late to meet my deadline. I had my meeting with David, and he agreed to be my personal and business attorney. I asked if I could leave all the paperwork I had gathered with him for safekeeping, and he consented to keep it in his vault until we could go over it together. We scheduled a meeting for the next day, Tuesday at 9 a.m., to review all the paperwork and formulate a plan for my divorce. When I left the office at 5:30 p.m., I smiled at Samantha and asked, "Well, Samantha, am I causing you trouble or are your evening plans still on track?" She smiled back and said, "You did just fine, Mr. Hagen. Our evening is proceeding as planned. I wish all our clients were as punctual as you've been, but please call me Sam from now on." "Thank you, Sam, and please call me Jack," I replied. The next morning, we went through all my business paperwork and contracts. I can't discuss the details here due to attorney-client privilege. However, I can tell you that David believed everything seemed in order from a business perspective. We paused for lunch, and David and Sam invited me to join them at the local diner. I agreed and met them there as I needed to stop at my bank before we continued in the afternoon. They were a delightful couple, and we had a very pleasant lunch together. I learned that they were both a few years older than me, and David mentioned that he was in the same grade as Tom Gentry, but that they weren't close. I suppose they were too competitive with each other. I discovered that they'd been married for about 10 years and had 2 daughters, aged 6 and 3. They showed me pictures. And the 2 little ones were very charming, taking after their mom. I could see both had beautiful smiles just like Sam. I think that lunch did me a world of good. It made the transition into a relationship with my new attorney much easier. However, the downside was that I realized my life partner wasn't with me anymore. David and Sam were such a great couple and reminded me so much of how things had been with Kelly before I found out about her affair. It made me sad, and a couple of times I could feel my eyes welling up. David didn't seem to notice, but I could tell that Sam had picked up on it, and concern crossed her face. After lunch, I visited the bank and made some adjustments to safeguard my assets. I also obtained a $5,000 check made out to David Warner Law Offices as a retainer for their forthcoming work. David hadn't requested it yet, but I thought he'd appreciate the gesture. Returning to the office around 1:30 p.m., I was ready to continue our meeting. Sam informed me that David was on the phone and led me to the small conference room where we had been meeting. She inquired if I wanted coffee or anything else, and I declined, saying I was fine. She sat down beside me in one of the chairs and extended her hand. "David didn't inform me about the specifics, Jack, but I can sense the nature of this afternoon's discussion based on your demeanor during lunch. I noticed you're wearing a wedding ring, so I assume it's related to your wife. If you permit, I'd like to ask David to allow me to sit in on your meeting this afternoon as we address whatever it is you need to share with us." I was on the brink of breaking down again, so I just nodded my consent. My anger had subsided for the moment, and it seemed the hurtful emotions were more prevalent. It felt reassuring to have a woman nearby with her natural sensitivity. I realized that I might indeed require Sam's sympathetic presence during the afternoon meeting. I recounted the entire story of discovering Kelly's infidelity. I did break down a couple of times, and Sam stepped in to offer sympathy and solace. After regaining control of my emotions, I outlined my intentions. Unless circumstances change my mind, I plan to file for divorce and enforce the terms of the prenuptial agreement. David and I thoroughly reviewed the prenuptial agreement, and its terms are essentially as follows. I retain 100% ownership of all farm assets, real estate, and personal property. Kelly retains 100% ownership of the grain business assets. If there has been no infidelity, Kelly is entitled to 50% of our financial assets. However, if infidelity is proven, Kelly only receives $25,000 for each year of unfaithfulness, not 50%. I also only get $225,000 for each year of unfaithfulness, not 50%. Household personal property is divided equally, regardless of the circumstances. David inquires about my need to provide evidence of infidelity. I respond to him, explaining that I have the evidence but won't reveal it at this moment or to anyone else unless it becomes necessary for a court presentation, in which case I would show it to the judge. Despite my response, David persists, expressing his need to see the evidence to confirm the case of infidelity and to be certain. I reassure David, telling him he needs to trust me. I mentioned that I possess the evidence but also emphasize my concern for Kelly, stating that I don't want anyone else to witness what I've seen unless it's absolutely necessary. Sam touches David's arm and nods in agreement. Eventually, David reluctantly consents. Over the next couple of days, Kelly made multiple phone calls and left voicemail messages for me. I did not answer her calls and deleted the messages without listening to them. David also contacted me and informed me that we had scheduled a meeting for Thursday involving myself, Kelly, David, and Richard. Update: during the meeting on Thursday, I plan to ask Kelly some questions. How she responds will decide if I go through with the divorce and on what grounds. Let's see how things unfold. On Thursday at 10:30 a.m., David and I went to Richard's office to meet with him and Kelly. When we got there, Kelly's car was already in the parking lot, so we entered the office. Richard's assistant guided us to a small conference room where we waited for a few minutes before Richard and Kelly joined us. Kelly looked much better than she did when I saw her at Richard's office earlier in the week. She had clearly made an effort to look nice for the meeting because she appeared beautiful. I did my best to hide my feelings because I didn't want her to see how much I still cared for her. She smiled at me and said, "Jack, I hope we can finally talk and clear up this misunderstanding. I miss you and want to come home." I didn't reply because I was afraid my voice would break if I spoke. I needed to regain control of my emotions. It wouldn't be easy, but I had to do it. David spoke up saying, "We're here to discuss the divorce process for ending Jack and Kelly's marriage. I believe we should start by allowing both of them to express their thoughts and opinions on how this young couple can move forward." Richard nodded and added, "My client believes this is all a big misunderstanding and is eager to resolve the issues with her husband." I had been struggling to manage my emotions, but Richard did me a favor by reigniting my anger. Right now my anger was boiling, and I knew I could control it, making it easier to manage my emotions, hurt, and disappointment in Kelly. "I would be okay," I said. "That works for me, Richard. Your client can talk to her husband." I looked across the table at Kelly and continued, "Kelly, here are the facts. When we got married, we signed a prenuptial agreement. We updated it 2 years ago when you joined your father's business. I've brought copies of the updated agreement for everyone to have." Kelly appeared a bit shocked and said quietly, "But Jack, I don't want a divorce. I want to be your wife. Why can't we just move past this misunderstanding and go home to be happy again?" I somewhat brushed over her comment and went on. "Our intention was to protect our individual interests while still enjoying the benefits of our marriage. Initially, the prenuptial agreement was to safeguard assets in my family for generations. Then, when you joined your father's business, it was also meant to protect the assets that have been in your family for a long time. In case of a divorce, our agreement is very clear. I will keep 100% of the assets from my family, and you will keep 100% of the assets from your family. Any debts related to these business assets will belong to the respective business, and the other party won't be responsible. Since we both contributed to our marital assets, our agreement outlines specific ways to split money and property depending on the circumstances of our divorce. As you can see from this document, you have the right to all your personal belongings like clothing, jewelry, your car, and other things that typically don't concern men. Similarly, I have the same right to my belongings. All other non-farm personal property, such as furniture, artwork, electronics, etc., will be divided equally between us. Farm personal property, like grain bins and machinery, equipment, etc., will remain entirely mine as they are essential for the farming operation. The financial division for you during a divorce would be 50% of our assets if there was no infidelity. However, there are 2 exceptions in case of infidelity, as mentioned in the document. If you divorce me due to infidelity, I would receive only $25,000 per year, or a total of $200,000, not 50%. If I divorce you due to infidelity, the distribution would be $225,000 per year, or $200,000 in total, not 50%. I'm going to ask you some questions, Kelly. Your answers will determine if I proceed with the divorce and on what grounds. This will also affect the outcome of any financial settlements. If we want to save our marriage, Kelly, you must answer every question truthfully. If you refuse or I catch you lying, it's over. Do you understand? Are you willing to do this to give our marriage a chance?" Kelly seemed shocked as I laid out the details of our prenuptial agreement. She quickly regained her composure and replied, "Yes, Jack, I will answer your questions honestly. I love you, and I want our marriage to survive. I'll do whatever it takes to make you stop this and let me come back home." "Kelly, I'd like to record these questions. Is that okay with you?" This time she hesitated briefly and turned to Richard, who had been mostly quiet until now. Richard, being the typical lawyer, said, "Kelly, I would advise against it, but you should do what you think is best for you." My lawyer David spoke up, "Kelly, I agree with Richard. I wouldn't advise you or my client to record this, but it's Jack you need to convince, not Richard or me. Do what you feel is right." Kelly responded, "I'll do anything to resolve this misunderstanding. Yes, go ahead and record this. I'm okay with recording any conversation between Jack and me." David and I brought a tape recorder, so we placed it on the table where it could capture all the voices. Kelly inquired about my questions. I replied, explaining that I wanted to ask her about her faithfulness, breaking it down into 3 different time periods. The first period I mentioned extended from the time we committed to being exclusive until the day we got engaged. I asked if she had been faithful during that time. Kelly responded with a smile, stating that she had been faithful during that time. However, I pointed out that she had lied, marking it as lie number 1, and her smile turned to shock. I added that I considered walking out at that moment, but decided not to do so just yet. I asked Kelly if she hadn't been involved in an intimate encounter with Larry Evendale 2 days after we promised to be exclusive. I mentioned that Larry was known for bragging, and that he had told me she invited him over on a Tuesday night when her parents were away, and they were intimate on her own bed. Before he left, he claimed that she really enjoyed it, and that he expected more chances in the future, even after our marriage. I added that Amber overheard the conversation and assured me that Kelly loved me and wouldn't cheat again, urging me not to do anything foolish. I acknowledged that she had already told me a lie, but I could understand why she did it, even if I didn't like it. I decided to let that one go, but warned her that there would be no more passes, and that she should be truthful from then on or face the consequences. I continued by explaining that after that incident I didn't trust her, so I closely monitored her for the next 6 months. During that time she didn't raise any suspicions, so I eventually proposed and gave her the ring she was wearing. I acknowledged that she might have wanted it sooner, but I wasn't ready to fully trust her, so she had to wait. I asked Kelly the second question, inquiring if she had cheated on me during our engagement from the day she received the ring until our wedding day. Without hesitation, she responded with a firm, "No, absolutely not." I pretty much expected that answer. I explained that I believed it to be true because I still didn't fully trust her at that point. I mentioned that I had continued to keep an eye on her throughout that year until I felt confident about trusting her. I expressed that I was almost certain she had been faithful to me during that time. Richard, to his credit, suggested we take a break. He wanted to talk to his client and give her some time to collect herself. Both he and I noticed that during my discussion about Larry Evendale, Kelly became very emotional and was on the brink of breaking down. He wanted to let her regain her composure before we continued, so we decided to break for lunch. David and I picked up Sam, and we headed to the local diner for the Blue Plate special. Sam asked how things were going, and David said, "I think Jack is doing okay. Not much has come out yet, but he's laid the groundwork for an honest answer for the period when they were married. If Kelly confesses everything, he might still consider divorce, but he could also see that she genuinely wants to save the marriage. It'll be a tough call, but I think he can handle it. Of course, if she lies, Jack will have to decide how to proceed from there." Sam looked at me and seemed to sense my pain. I managed a weak smile and said, "This is incredibly tough, you know. Why do people do such foolish things, causing pain in their own lives and the lives of those they love?" She placed her hand on top of mine and said, "If only we could know, Jack. We'd give them a reality check before they made those foolish choices." That actually made me laugh, as did David. Even during these trying times, I could still find a way to laugh. I guess it's a testament to the resilience of people. People grieve at funerals, but also find moments to laugh. I suppose it's the same with divorces. Amidst the grief, there can still be room for laughter. I grinned at Sam and said, "Thanks, Sam. I really needed that." She simply nodded. Shortly after 1 p.m., we returned to Richard's office to continue our meeting with Kelly. Before I asked the next question, I reminded her, "You must answer these questions with complete honesty. If you lie in any way, it'll be the end of this meeting, and our marriage will have no chance. Do you understand?" Kelly replied, "Yes, I understand, and I'll tell you the truth." "Kelly," I inquired, "from the day we got married until now, did you ever cheat on me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and my heart ached for her. I knew this was painful for her, but I couldn't console her or let her off the hook. I needed her to care enough about our marriage to confess everything. I didn't know if I could prevent the divorce, but if she told me the complete truth, at least I'd know she wanted to try and save our marriage. "Yes, Jack, I did cheat on you. I'm so sorry, Jack. Can you ever forgive me?" I asked Richard and David to leave the room because I had more questions for Kelly, and I didn't want to embarrass her in front of those men. They objected, but I insisted that David leave, and Kelly nodded to Richard that she wanted him to leave as well. I had her confession of cheating on tape, which would be enough for a divorce hearing. I didn't want the rest of my questions and her answers on tape, so I turned it off. Kelly answered these questions: when, where, who, and why. She sniffled a few times and said, "Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry. It happened this weekend at PE Spa. I cheated with one of the masseurs. Named Mario. I don't exactly know why it happened, Jack. I guess it was just a moment of passion. Amber and I had been having a great day, and after a wonderful dinner, we both decided to get a massage before going to bed. Kelly told me that her masseur was Mario. She mentioned that she was on the massage table in the room, lying on her stomach, and how Mario began the massage, making her feel good. She admitted that Mario's hands felt soft and strong, and she didn't stop him. She added that at that moment, she had no idea things would go so far. She then started crying and said, "Oh, Jack, if I could go back, I never would have allowed it, and we wouldn't be where we are now. You have to believe me." I was shocked to hear all this, but I responded, "Even though this is shocking, Kelly, I am so sorry and I don't know what to say, but please forgive me, please." She sat there in silence, looking down and sniffling. After a while, she raised her head and gave me a questioning look. "Jack, is there any hope that you will forgive me?" Without making it sound like a courtroom, I asked, "Kelly, is this the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" She looked at me with a questioning and somewhat puzzled expression, as if she wondered how much I knew. Finally, she responded, "Yes, Jack, that is what happened. I am so sorry." At that moment, my heart was breaking, and against all odds, I managed to conceal the pain of her betrayal and my anger at her lies. I kept my composure, got up from the table, and signaled for David and Richard to return to the room. I looked at both men and firmly stated, "This meeting is over. Update: a robbery took place in my house, and although the detective found evidence of the robbery, they were uncertain about what was actually stolen. Let's see what happened next." After that, I walked toward the door and then turned around to address Kelly. I told her, "Kelly, I'm filing for divorce based on infidelity, and the terms of our prenuptial agreement will be upheld." She appeared shocked and asked, "But why, Jack? I confessed to my infidelity, and I'm begging you to forgive me and continue our marriage. Please, Jack, please, I love you so much. Please forgive me." I responded, "Kelly, you lied to me. You didn't care enough about our marriage to be completely honest. If you had been, I'm not even sure if I could have continued our marriage, but you didn't even give it a chance. You had the opportunity to come clean and be truthful, but you chose to lie. I know you were unfaithful more than just the one time with Mario, and I have the evidence. I warned you that you needed to tell the truth, and you didn't care enough about me or our marriage to do so. It's over." I turned back to the door, opened it, and began walking away. Kelly screamed, "Wait, Jack! I'll tell you everything you want to know. Please don't leave me." I turned around once more, glaring at her with a mixture of hurt and anger, and firmly said, "You were warned. You had your chance, and you thought you could get away with only admitting to one incident, so you lied." "You had your chance, Kelly," I shouted back at her. "It's over." David quickly followed me and caught up as I was getting into my car. He grabbed my arm and asked, "Do you really want to file for infidelity?" I replied, "Yes, I do. She had her chance. I must have misjudged her all these years. I wanted her to care enough to confess everything, but she couldn't even be honest with me. Now go ahead and file." I drove to our house, which was now my house, and grabbed a beer from the refrigerator. In fact, I grabbed two and entered my office. I sat at my desk and quickly drank the first one, then sipped the second as I contemplated everything that had transpired. I had several copies of the video downloads hidden in secure spots, but I didn't think I'd need to make them public since I had her confession. My head jerked up when I realized that I had left the tape in the office. I promptly called David and asked, "Hey, it's Jack. Did you grab the tape recording of Kelly's confession before you followed me?" "Oh no," I heard him say. "I forgot the tape, Jack. I rushed out after you to catch you, and I completely forgot about the tape. I'm so sorry, Jack." I'd been meticulous in planning everything, and then in my moment of hurt and anger, I had messed it up by storming out without the tape. "Damn," I suggested. David, why don't you give Richard a call and see if you can go over there to retrieve it? But my guess is they might say something like, we thought you had everything you needed when you left, so we just erased everything. Sorry. I'll be surprised if you can actually get it. But don't worry, even if you can't, I have enough evidence to file for infidelity anyway. David responded, Okay man, I'm sorry. I know you didn't want to use the video downloads and now you might have to if she contests the infidelity charge. I reassured him, Don't worry about it, David. Everything will work out. After I ended the call with David, I grabbed another beer from the refrigerator. Damn, how could I be so careless? I wasn't drunk, but I was numb as I watched the evening news before heading to bed. I thought I heard a vehicle pull into the yard, so I slowly rose from my chair and went to the back door. I walked onto the porch and saw a dark shape just before the lights went out. Something hit me on the back of the head, and then all I saw was blinding light before drifting into total darkness. I heard a beeping sound and opened my eyes to look around as best I could without moving. I had learned my lesson from the first time. I saw a nurse sitting in the chair beside me. I tried to turn, but I couldn't move. Hi Jack, I'm Susan, and I'm your nurse. Please don't try to move, okay? Everything will be okay, and I'll explain everything to you. But please stay still. Do you understand me? I felt something in my throat, but I managed to nod my head a little to show that I understood. Jack, I need to go tell the doctor that you've regained consciousness, and then we'll be right back in here, okay? I nodded once more to indicate my understanding. It was becoming clear to me that I must have been injured and was in the hospital. However, I couldn't remember anything about how it had occurred. I assumed that someone would eventually fill me in, so I lay there with my eyes closed until I sensed their presence again. Mr. Hagen, or Jack, said Dr. Julius. I am Dr. Julius. You sustained multiple injuries from a beating during a home robbery. Now that you've regained consciousness, I'm quite certain you'll recover, but we had to restrain you to prevent further injury from sudden movements. I'm sure you felt the intense pain when you tried to move yesterday, am I correct? I managed a slight smile as I nodded to acknowledge the pain. Yes, we should have been more proactive with the restraints to spare you that pain. I apologize for that. I think we can remove the restraints now, Nurse Johnson. But, Mr. Hagen, please refrain from attempting any independent movements just yet, all right? I nodded and gestured toward the tube in my throat. Yes, we can also take out the ventilator now. Nurse Johnson will handle it. They removed the restraints in the tube, and my throat was in excruciating pain. I couldn't speak initially, but after some time I was given a sip of water and I could speak, though my voice was raspy and painful, so I spoke in a whisper. Could someone please tell me what happened to me? Dr. Julius explained. Jack, it's 7 a.m. and you've just regained consciousness and been taken off the ventilator. Your throat will be sore for a while, and for now, we'd like you to rest. Nurse Johnson will stay with you, and after some time to recover, we'll contact the police to let them know you're ready to talk. They can provide you with all the details of what occurred. He continued, I can tell you that medically, you have some injuries. The EMTs arrived in time to revive you, and we were able to reinflate your lung. To be straightforward, you've been physically assaulted. We'll closely monitor your condition for a few more days, and then you'll likely be discharged. As promised, I had the rest of that day to rest, with Nurse Johnson nearby the entire time. By later that afternoon, I could sit up with significant assistance and use the restroom. Susan, Nurse Johnson, and I had a chance to chat, and I learned that she was a schoolmate from about 3 years behind me. She was known as Susan Fisk back then, but she had married Chad Johnson and had a 3-year-old daughter named Emily. Similar to Kelly, it turned out that Chad too had been unfaithful, leading to their divorce. I shared the story of what had been happening with Kelly, and naturally, she was quite understanding. The following morning, bright and early, I had a visit from 2 police detectives, Harold Robbins and Josh Carter. Before they could dive too deep into their questioning, I asked them to brief me on what had transpired. Detective Robbins explained, It appears that this was a robbery that resulted in an attack on you. We found a 2X4 on the porch near you, and it had traces of your hair and blood. There were no fingerprints on it, so we assumed that the person who used it was wearing gloves. The door to your house showed no signs of forced entry, but that's because you came out onto the porch and the door was already open. He went on. When we searched your house, we noticed that several pictures had been taken off the walls. There was an empty strongbox in one of the desk drawers, and all the file cabinets in the office had been rifled through. In the bedrooms, the drawers and closets had been searched, and there were empty compartments in a jewelry box in the master bedroom. While we see signs of a robbery, we're uncertain about what was actually taken. Detective Carter chimed in, Once you're able to return home, you'll need to assess things to the best of your ability and determine what's missing. The doctor indicated it might be another 3 or 4 days before you can go home. At that point, we'll review everything with you, and you can help us update our reports. Detective Robbins took the lead again, indicating it was time to pose some questions. What do you recall about the attack and the events that followed? Well, I replied, I'm afraid it's not much. I'd had a couple of beers and was watching the evening news when I heard a vehicle pull into the yard. I got up to see what was going on, stepped out onto the porch, and saw a shadowy figure in the darkness just before the lights went out. I can't remember seeing or hearing anything else until yesterday. I fear I won't be of much help in solving who did this. Detective Robbins continued, expressing the need to ask a few questions that might aid their investigation, and inquired about my wife's whereabouts during the incident. I informed the detective that my wife and I were separated and going through a divorce, so I honestly didn't know where she was at the time. The detective then asked if he could call me Jack, to which I agreed. He inquired about the progress of our divorce proceedings and whether there was a lot of conflict between us. I responded, saying it wasn't going well, as she was challenging the grounds I planned to file for. He further questioned the grounds for the divorce, and I explained that I intended to file for infidelity, and her settlement would be significantly lower under those terms, which she was disputing. The detective commented that this provided her with a motive. I added, Detective, I just can't believe she'd do anything to harm me. I can't believe it. He reassured me, saying they would examine that closely as part of their investigation. He asked if there were any other individuals who might have a motive to harm me and inquired about any disputes with neighbors, friends, family, or anyone else. I replied, no, I can't think of anything. The detective then mentioned the need to conduct a thorough inventory of what's missing when I was able, and he asked if there was any cash in the house, possibly in the strongbox, and if so, how much. He also asked if there were any other valuable items in the house, such as jewelry and artworks worth thousands of dollars or more. I told them, yes, there was some cash in the strongbox. I'd estimate it was around $8,000. I usually keep about $10,000 in cash on hand, but I've used some of it recently, so it's probably around $8,000. There were a few nice pieces of jewelry, but none valued over $1,000. I can't think of anything else of significant value at the moment. I decided not to mention the hidden safe behind the bookcase at this point. The detective hadn't brought it up, and I was fairly certain no one had discovered it. I wanted to keep it a secret if possible. The detective told me, well, Jack, I think that's all for today. If you remember anything else, please don't hesitate to call me. When you're ready to return home, let us know so we can do the inventory. If we have more questions, we'll either visit you here or at your home. Over the next 4 days, I gradually improved. I had plenty of naps, and at times I sat and chatted with Susan. I had several visitors, including Wall-E, Amber, David, and Sam. Kelly didn't come to see me, and apart from Amber, none of her family visited either. Given the circumstances, it was understandable, but I would have welcomed the company. Richard, Kelly's attorney, did come to see me. We had been friends for years before the divorce began, and I was glad for his visit. Everyone expressed their sympathy for my injury and wished me a speedy recovery. Both Amber and Sam kissed me on the cheek before leaving, and I could see tears welling up in their eyes. I had a rough time during those 4 days. Even though I slept, I had some pretty unsettling dreams. Sometimes I'd wake up feeling panicked, with my heart racing and tears in my eyes. A few times I'd wake up not knowing where I was, but it seemed like Susan was always there to comfort me with her gentle words and touches. I'm pretty sure I even woke myself up with a scream once, though I couldn't remember the details of the scary dreams. Later on, I learned that Susan stayed at the hospital with me even when she was off duty. She only left to freshen up and change her clothes each day. She told me it was because of the troubles in my marriage and she wanted to be there for me. I was truly grateful for her support. Dr. Julius came to let me know that I'd be discharged soon. I was relieved and quickly got ready to leave. Susan helped me prepare, and she even wheeled me down to the lobby where Wall-E and Amber were waiting to take me home. Susan wished me good luck and gave me a warm hug. I could tell she cared about me, but my life was in chaos with problems in my marriage and my health, so I didn't pursue a deeper relationship with her. I mentioned that I'd like to call her sometime in the future, and that was the extent of it. Update: as soon as I entered my house, I could see the mess that still lingered there. Wall-E and Amber offered to help me clean up, but I told them I'd prefer to leave things as they were for now until I had a chance to go through everything. I assured them I'd call them when I was ready for their help, and they reluctantly agreed, leaving me alone. My first task was to check the safe behind the bookcase in my office. To my relief, everything was intact, including a significant amount of cash, certificates of deposit, stocks, bonds, and the DVD containing evidence of Kelly's infidelity. It was clear that no one had discovered the safe, or they would have taken these valuables as well. I inspected the rest of the office and noticed that aside from the cash, my laptop computer, and a few numbered prints of Wildlife by Terry Redlin, nothing seemed to be missing. However, I did see bank statements and credit card statements laid out on the desk, so I alerted both the bank and credit card companies to be on the lookout for any unusual activity. Over a couple of weeks, the investigation into the robbery and assault progressed slowly because the police lacked any substantial evidence that could lead to a suspect. Detectives Robbins and Carter provided regular updates on their work, but no new leads had surfaced. They explained that due to the absence of high-value items being stolen, tracking down potential culprits through fences, as in some cases, was a dead end. During their last update, they implied that the case might be put on hold unless significant evidence emerged. In the initial stages of the investigation, they had questioned me about Kelly and me. I had been cooperative and forthcoming for the most part. I strongly believed that Kelly wouldn't harm me, and that taking items she would have received in the divorce didn't make sense. It seemed the detectives shared this perspective, as their inquiries regarding Kelly didn't lead to anything substantial. I decided to open new bank accounts and order new checks because I had concerns that my old accounts might have been compromised to some extent. Fortunately, I could account for all the activity on my old accounts, but I felt more secure with the new ones in place. I also acquired a new laptop computer and reorganized my office, getting back to work as usual. I sat down to handle some overdue bills and found an invoice from RedditStories, Inc. A sudden realization hit me for the first time since the robbery. RedditStories stood for Remote Electronic Data Storage Solutions. I had video surveillance of my property, covering the house, grain bins, and machine shed. This footage was sent to the computer in my grain office near the bins and dryer. Every night it was uploaded to RedditStories as a backup. They retained this data, and I paid a monthly fee based on the amount of data they stored. Normally, each month I delete the oldest data to manage the fees. However, I hadn't deleted anything since the robbery. I had video evidence. Without hesitation, I logged into RedditStories' website and selected the day of the robbery from their archives. I downloaded the entire day onto my laptop to review it. My hope was that the video quality would be sufficient to identify the culprits who had assaulted and robbed me. If it met my expectations, I planned to create a copy on a DVD and provide it to Detectives Robbins and Carter to jumpstart their investigation. As I went through the footage, it became clear that there was nothing valuable to share with the detectives, leading me to believe that they might not solve the case. With the bills paid, I started outlining my path forward in life. I decided to reach out to an old college friend who worked at Cargill, one of the largest grain merchandisers in the United States. Through my connection, I arranged a meeting with the decision-makers in their acquisition department. It was astounding how personal connections could make things happen. After about 2 weeks, I had finalized my plans with Cargill, and I also took a brief trip to Las Vegas. I flew to Phoenix due to some business there, and then returned home to set my plans in motion. I contacted David and had him arrange a meeting with Kelly, her brothers Tom and Carl, and her sister Amber at Gentry Grain. I instructed him to mention that with the impending divorce, the state's grain reserves might no longer suffice because they couldn't include my grain storage. I wanted to discuss the situation with them and find a resolution. Apparently, David's message surprised them, but they agreed readily to meet with me. It seemed they hadn't considered the implications of my grain no longer being part of the equation. I walked into the office and greeted everyone. "Hello, Tom, Carl, Amber, Kelly. I assume you understood one of the reasons I felt we should sit down and resolve some issues." Tom began to speak, but I raised my hand and said, "I initiated this meeting, so I suggest you all just sit here and listen to what I have to say before making any comments. I genuinely believe it's in everyone's best interest if you do that. First, I'd like to address this divorce matter. I apologize, Kelly." I placed the final draft of the divorce papers on the table in front of Kelly and requested, "Please sign these." She responded, "Jack, I don't want a divorce. Whatever you think I did isn't worth throwing away all the good years we've had. I wish you could forgive me and work through our problems. I certainly don't want to do this here in front of my brothers and sister. Kelly, we're going to conclude this now. There's no future for our marriage, and the sooner you sign these papers, the sooner we can both move on with our lives." She blushed and said, "Well, if you insist on divorcing me, I still plan to contest the infidelity issue. It's the least you can do for me." I knew she would play that card, and I was prepared. "If you choose to fight me on the infidelity issue, Kelly, I'll have no choice but to present this DVD as evidence in court." I placed a copy of the DVD on the table alongside the divorce papers. "In case you're wondering, it's a video showing all 8 times you cheated on me at the spa." Amber's face turned bright red, and she glared at Kelly, expressing her disbelief and disappointment in Kelly's actions toward me. I chimed in, confirming that Kelly had indeed avoided Mario and Steven, and I emphasized that I had 8 videos of her avoiding them, which I believed would resolve the infidelity issue. I gave her an ultimatum to sign the divorce papers or face court proceedings, making it clear that I was no longer willing to play games with her. I could see that Tom and Carl were also shocked by the revelation, and Amber was quietly crying. Kelly eventually signed the divorce papers, and I left her a copy while placing the rest in my briefcase. Kelly appeared numb, with unshed tears in her eyes, and I noted her shock at the evidence I had to prove multiple instances of infidelity. Moving on to the matter of the grain situation, I addressed the group, acknowledging their shock and assuring them that I would be brief despite the unfortunate news. I explained that due to the divorce, they would no longer have the value of my stored grain included in their reserves, which would put them in violation of their grain license and loan agreements. On a positive note, I informed them that I had purchased their father's 52% stake in the business, emphasizing that their agreement with him lacked a first right of refusal clause, which had made the purchase relatively straightforward. I mentioned that he was aware of the company's need for my equity and believed I had evidence of Kelly's infidelity, making it an easy decision for him. Consequently, I had become the majority shareholder in Gentry Grain Inc., and they each owned 12%, making them the minority with a 48% stake. I then explained that I had negotiated a deal to sell my controlling interest in Gentry Grain to Cargill, a company constantly seeking promising grain operations. I mentioned the option for them to sell their shares at the same price I negotiated, which I considered favorable. However, the downside was that their company was now owned by someone else, and the new owners would assess personnel to determine their contributions to the company. I pointed out the upside that, as part of my negotiations, they each had 1 year of guaranteed job security. I encouraged them to work hard to prove their worth during that time. Additionally, I disclosed that I had sold my farm and Wally's farm to Cargill, with Wally entering a long-term contract to manage both farms for them. Given his excellent performance, the shock I observed on their faces deepened, now mixed with a degree of anger. Tom, being the eldest and the unofficial leader of the Gentry family, was the first to voice his concerns. "What on earth have you done, Jack? You've ruined this family business because my sister cheated on you? What kind of man are you anyway? How did you convince my father to sell you his shares? What lies did you tell him?" "Let me clarify, Tom," I replied. "Your father sold me his shares to keep you, Carl, and Kelly out of legal trouble. Instead of questioning the kind of man I am, you should be asking yourself what kind of people your siblings are." I placed the second DVD in the center of the table. This video will provide all the answers you seek about why this is all happening. It unmistakably captures your pickup truck in my yard on the night I was assaulted. It unmistakably shows you and Carl assaulting me. It clearly captures you exiting my house with my belongings. Consider yourselves fortunate that I chose this path of vengeance rather than handing it over to Detectives Robbins and Carter. Kelly finally spoke up, expressing her dismay at my actions. I responded, telling her that our situation was different. I mentioned how I felt that I had wasted my entire life with her, emphasizing the way her family treated me and how she too had a sense of superiority over me despite being my best friend. I accused her of being a deceitful partner, reminding her that she had promised to be faithful but had promptly slept with Larry Evendale. I continued, stating that she had been an unfaithful spouse, disrespecting me and our marriage by being involved with those men. I mentioned that I had witnessed everything on the video, hearing every word. I confronted her with the fact that she had almost killed me in the attack, which, in my view, made her a terrible friend. Kelly fainted, and Amber and Carl rushed to her side, catching her before she fell, after she regained consciousness. I delivered my final blow by revealing that her father had sold me his shares to keep all 3 of them out of jail. I mentioned that he wasn't very proud of his children, except for Amber, and she would hear about it in the future. As I mentioned earlier, I declared that I believed I had wasted most of my life on her, but I wouldn't waste any more of my future. I wished her a wonderful life, and then left the room, concluding all the negotiations. I felt free to move forward, and that's exactly what I intended to do.
Story 3.
I woke up feeling queasy in my stomach. His hand rested on my back while the other attempted to intrude into my private area. A severe headache plagued me, unrelated to the drink consumed the night before. "Honey, I'm not a morning person," I muttered to CJ. "Oh, sorry," he whined. "But what about all those tales of you and Mark going at it all night and half the next day? I was 20. I grumbled. At 20, deeply in love, you can thrive on lovemaking. "Oh," he said, sounding sad. He resembled a hurt puppy, making me question my choices again. On paper, everything seemed perfect. I traded a 40-year-old man who worked all day and tinkered with his car for a 30-year-old who adored me. Mark focused on his job and saving for our future, while CJ was solely devoted to me. Mark, though not controlling or violent, always seemed to pick fights. When I stood firm, he'd smirk and walk away. That wasn't how things were supposed to be. My father always complied with my mother's wishes. He understood the saying, "Happy wife, happy life." Mr. Mark Clayton would shoot me a look that seemed to say, "You're crazy." If I denied him closeness, he'd just shrug and tinker more with his car. I despised that Mustang passionately. And the strangest part? Depriving him of lovemaking seemed to turn him into a blabbering fool, as my mother predicted. Yet a couple of days after I started refusing him, he developed a habit of checking his watch. I spotted a calendar in our kitchen with next weekend circled in red. Several days leading up to it were marked too. It didn't add up until I rummaged through his sock drawer and found a brochure for a high-end brothel in Las Vegas. The cover featured photos of women who seemed eager to please my husband for free and would gladly charge me for the same. They were all young and attractive. I was nearly in shock. What irked me most was that he had already crossed out that day, and it wasn't even noon yet. I wasn't foolish, and there's no chance I'll allow him to go off and engage in carnal encounters with a group of professional women. I anticipated the outcome of this scenario. He would have attempted to discard me swiftly, even quicker than his Mustang could reach 60 miles per hour in under 5 seconds. So that evening, recognizing where my primary support lay, I propositioned him for lovemaking. I was seething with anger, and ultimately I ended up feeling hurt. "Nope," he responded. His words came out swiftly, almost as an afterthought. It seemed inconsequential, unworthy of acknowledgement. My frustration reached boiling point as the situation reversed. "Come on, Mark, it's been a whole week already," I pleaded. "I'm just not feeling it," he replied. "I could attend to your needs," I suggested. I attempted to appear alluring with a smile, although it felt like a struggle, especially when my deepest desire was to rid myself of him entirely. "Please, darling, let me please you," I begged. "I'm not sure," he mused as if contemplating. "You don't seem very into it. Maybe in a week." I was stunned, as this was a recurring pattern between us. I'd tried employing all the tactics gleaned from TV, magazines, and my mother to gain the upper hand, yet Mark always seemed to prevail. Conversely, CJ adored me. I held a divine status in his eyes. All I had to do was ask, and he would comply. Why hadn't I left Mark for CJ yet? There were 2 reasons. Firstly, deep down, I loved Mark despite despising his work ethic, his sense of responsibility, and his aversion to confrontation. Secondly, the more practical reason was CJ's lack of financial stability, despite his adoration and willingness to cater to my desires. Mark, the foolish man I married, earned a 6-figure salary. Perhaps that's why things had deteriorated between us. It wasn't always like this. Initially, we were deeply in love. However, 20 years and countless arguments had compelled us both to fortify our defenses against each other. As I reflected on how our enduring love had turned into constant yearning and eventually into intense animosity, CJ came to mind. He gently caressed my legs, trying to boost my mood without upsetting me. His gentle touch always had a powerful effect on me. However, when Mark tried the same, CJ's efforts only made me more irritated. I asked CJ to come closer and massage my chest. He responded with enthusiasm. I nodded, and he promptly moved towards me. I hesitated to inform him that his leg rubbing was bothering me and distracting my thoughts. Conversely, my large chest were as artificial as my blonde hair. Following surgery, I realized I had lost most sensation in my breast buds. Mark always knew how to pleasure me there, unlike anyone else. Another aspect I despised about him. He excelled in bed, and his manhood was undeniably larger than CJ's. Mark always left me trembling like jelly. It was hard to believe he never cheated. Even harder to believe he truly loved and still loves me. This will be tough for him, but it's advantageous because it means I can return to him if necessary. Honestly, I wouldn't consider leaving Mark if he didn't always have to win every argument. If he had just let me take control as intended, we would have been much happier. In fact, if I had been in charge, I would have been a happier wife and made him the happiest man on the planet. But he angered me too often. It was CJ who helped me understand my true power in relationships. He told me that in divorces, women usually have the advantage, while husbands often end up living with their mothers and eating canned tuna. CJ himself was living with a woman who wanted to marry him, but she wasn't exactly his ideal partner. Since they weren't married, breaking up with her wouldn't be a problem. I acknowledged his point. He seemed surprised. Today was the day he suggested I should call him, CJ whispered while gently caressing my chest. Then it clicked, the plan we'd been strategizing for weeks. We patiently awaited the opportune moment, and this week fell into place perfectly. It was opportune because Mark was away, and both CJ and I shied away from confronting my husband directly about my decision to leave him and file for divorce. The mere thought of it churned my stomach. I have a modest sense of morality, and the notion of contacting him while he worked tirelessly on business, funding our lifestyle, felt wrong. Mark deserved better, a heartfelt conversation about our relationship. If we concluded our marriage was beyond repair, only then should divorce be broached. Following the divorce, we'd both be free to pursue new relationships. It wasn't the noblest approach, but it was the path we chose. Throughout our more than 20 years of marriage, Mark never laid a hand on me or raised his voice. When disagreements arose, he aimed for compromise, a trait that often frustrated me. He was too willing to settle. If compromise failed, he'd flash a quirky grin and walk away. Over time, I grew familiar with his thought process, understanding precisely what that look meant. It was a silent declaration of, "Screw you, you'll get nothing if you won't agree to half," or "Who'd want closeness with a 40-year-old when I can enjoy myself in Vegas?" Over the years, my resentment festered, reaching a point where I craved it all. In the divorce, I'd claim everything: the house, my possessions, and most of his finances. And when he retired, I'd expect half of his pension too. I consulted a lawyer, had divorce papers drawn up, and confided in my mother and numerous friends. They all expressed confidence in its success, but advised against it. What irked me was that even my mother, who always harbored disdain for Mark, deemed me irrational for considering divorce. Yet their opposition fueled my resolve. My lawyer, driven solely by profit, suggested citing mental injury and neglect as grounds for divorce. It was a deceitful ploy, but it promised the freedom and control over my life that I craved. Deep down, I resented his obliviousness. But life is harsh, and he's capable of resilience. He'll bounce back with time. Besides, had I taken the time to discuss matters with him, he likely would have attempted compromise or talked me out of it. Sometimes drastic measures are necessary to capture someone's attention. It felt like one of those do unto others before they do unto you moments in life. I took a deep breath and answered the phone. CJ intensified his focus on my unconscious friend, as if urging me on. The rumble of trucks could be heard from behind the house, probably a neighbor's furniture delivery. I dialed a number I'd grown all too familiar with over the years. It rang once and connected midway through the second ring. It seemed almost too coincidental, as if he anticipated my call. "Mark?" I asked cautiously. "Who else would answer?" he replied. His casual response softened my self-reproach slightly. "Why are you calling me?" he questioned. He spoke as if it were strange or unexpected for me to call. Upon reflection, I realized he was right. I hadn't called him in years, except when I needed something for myself. This man had worked tirelessly to provide for us, while I had largely ignored him. Perhaps what I wanted would benefit us both. Maybe I could let him keep a little more money. I didn't need to hurt him. I just needed to be free. "I'm your wife," I reminded him.
I was on the brink of liberation, feeling the intensity build as I neared the finish line. I could feel sweat dripping onto Shannon beneath me. She responded with a high-pitched sound, pulling me closer and sealing our lips in a passionate kiss. Her grip tightened around me. I let out a breath, trying to regain my composure. Shannon giggled and kissed me again. The temptation was strong. "Shannon, darling, I can't resist," I managed to choke out. She whispered back, "You'll have to wait a little longer, sweetheart. It'll be much better if you do." Every word from her was drawing me closer to the edge. "Oh my God, drive me wild, baby," I said, struggling to maintain control. Shannon had this incredible ability to push me to the edge, leaving me always wanting more. It was hard to believe it had only been 3 months since I met her. Just as I felt like I was about to lose myself, my phone rang, breaking the spell. I glanced down to see Shannon, clearly enjoying herself. Her eyes were rolled back, legs trembling. "Ooh, baby, that feels amazing," she murmured. I tried to refocus. "What are you doing to me, Shannon?" I asked, annoyed at the interruption. "I'm trying to make you happy, Mark," she said slyly. I couldn't help but confess. "I've been happy since I met you." She grinned. "You'll be even happier when we're finished. Answer the call." Hoping it might be important, I reached for the phone. But it wasn't what I expected. It was the movers. I had completely forgotten they were supposed to call upon arrival. Shannon, undeterred, resumed her playful actions, reigniting my excitement. Just as I was getting back into the moment, my phone rang again. I recognized the number and nodded to Shannon. She looked at me with a mix of amusement and a mischievous grin. After the call, Shannon rolled over and nestled beside me. I couldn't help but admire her physique. Her toned legs, heart-shaped derriere, and slender waist were mesmerizing. It was as if she was a work of art, perfectly sculpted. I chuckled at her jest about God focusing more on her posterior than her chest. I was in love again. Yes, again. Only for the second time. But this time, everything felt right. This love was akin to a phoenix, rising from the ashes of my past. Perhaps I should begin from the start. 3 months ago, I was a fool in love, enamored with a woman who despised me, and deep down, we both knew it. Yet I loved her, genuinely. Naively, I believed she loved me in return. Admittedly, my marriage had its troubles. We argued incessantly, but I thought it was a phase all couples endured. My awakening came when my secretary announced a visitor. As Shannon entered my office and took a seat, confusion clouded my mind. "Which company are you representing?" I inquired. "I'm part of the you and me out to avenge the idiocy of the corporation," she retorted. "I'm lost," I confessed. "You're about to be, Mark, and it won't be gentle," she warned. With a shrug of her petite shoulders, she continued, "Your wife is cheating on you." Initially, I thought I misheard, but her certainty left no room for doubt. She stated it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the color of the sky. Deep down, I sensed she spoke the truth. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Sweat dotted my brow, my heart raced, and tears threatened to spill. Imagery of Anne with an unidentified man, lost in ecstasy, flooded my mind. Then the floodgates opened and tears streamed down my face. Ashamed of my vulnerability, I buried my head, refusing to let this petite redhead witness my anguish. Suddenly I was enveloped in the scent of cherries. Warm hands lifted my head, offering solace and tenderness. "I'm so sorry," she murmured gently. "I never saw this coming. I suppose I expected you to react like I did when I found out. I thought you'd get angry and want to confront my boyfriend." Perched on my desk, she cradled my head in her lap, stroking it in an effort to soothe me. "You love her, don't you?" She shook her head. "Even though she cheats on you and never speaks well of you. Do you truly love her? When they're together, all she does is criticize and dictate. I don't understand. You try so hard to support her, yet she fails to appreciate you or your efforts. Why do you care so much about her?" She continued to stroke my head, her voice calming, and I wondered if she aimed to pacify me or if she was simply thinking aloud. "Is it because of her blonde hair and ample chest?" she questioned. "CJ has a thing for blondes with big chests too. I expected more from you." Suddenly I met her gaze. "I don't know why I'm so furious with her." "I loved her before she dyed her hair," I retorted. "And I'm the one who paid for those chests." Her response was a burst of laughter so melodious it caught me off guard. "What's amusing?" I inquired. "I'm just speaking the truth." "I know, dear," she replied. "But my dense ex has no clue that his dream woman is mostly artificial. It likely cost you a fortune to make her look that way." I shook my head, feeling as though I were in a haze, yet my anger persisted. Shannon divulged everything, how they met and Anne's ulterior motives. They strategized, believing they'd found the best way to remove me from Anne's life while securing most of my assets. Shannon found herself in a similar, albeit less lawful situation. She'd supported CJ from the start, even as he indulged in affairs with women at the bar where he worked part-time, all the while yearning for his ideal blonde with ample curves, whom he found in Anne. Beyond the physical enhancements I financed, Anne also seemed to fulfill a maternal role for him. Shannon hired a private investigator to gather intel on CJ. I conversed with her agent, Sarah Price, multiple times before agreeing to her terms. It wasn't particularly challenging. However, this information proved futile for Shannon. Sarah, another striking redhead, reiterated this to Shannon numerous times. Since Shannon and CJ weren't married, the information held no weight for her. CJ could easily leave Shannon without repercussion. Conversely, I could utilize Sarah's findings and recordings to bolster my stance in the divorce proceedings and potentially lessen the financial settlement with Anne and her paramour. Over the weeks of observation and strategizing, Shannon and I grew closer. One evening, it all culminated in a conversation. "Shannon, you deserve better than him," I asserted. "Why don't you just leave?" she suggested. "Forget about him." "But I can't leave without repercussions. I don't let anyone walk all over me," I explained. "But haven't you already gained the upper hand by uncovering his schemes? You're not emotionally tied to him like I was, so you're not trapped, right?" I reasoned. "You're young and stunning. There's still time for you to find someone who'll treat you right." Even in the dim interior of my Mustang, her green eyes sparkled. "So you finally noticed, huh?" she teased. "Noticed what?" I inquired. She grinned. "I noticed you. From the moment you walked into my office," I confessed. "Rubbish," she chuckled. "You were so infatuated with Anne that you didn't even register that I was a woman, let alone possibly interested in you?" Her laughter, as always, enchanted me. It was one of the things I adored most about her. "Why do you think I'm still here?" She choked up. "I ended things with CJ and any desire for retribution weeks ago. Helping you get even means much more to me than seeking revenge on that fool. I just can't stand the idea of you being financially burdened by those two con artists for the rest of their lives. There has to be a way for us to break free from this, darling." She drew close to me, embraced me, and kissed me for the first time. I was taken aback, yet I relished it too much to entertain the notion of not kissing her back. At 40, after 2 decades of marriage, I thought I knew how to kiss. But my experience was solely with Anne. Kissing Shannon was an entirely different sensation. The taste, the feeling, it was all distinct. I couldn't get enough. We lost track of time, forgetting about the tape recording of our cheating partners. Eventually, a voice interrupted us, but Shannon refused to let go of my hand. "I suspected as much." "All right, I was hoping this would happen," Sarah remarked with a smile. "You two are adorable together. You're much better suited for each other than your current partners. Now that you're a couple, we can let those schemers go. They'll get their comeuppance eventually." "But what about the divorce and our retaliation?" Shannon inquired. Sarah surprised us by explaining some legal matters. "The question is, are you both committed enough to pursue this?" Sarah asked. "Take some time to consider. This is a significant decision. I'll send you the bill." She smiled. The subsequent weeks were dedicated to crafting our narrative. Shannon and I honed our acting abilities. We both informed our partners about our supposed hectic work schedules, and it's astonishing that they bought into it. Neither of them had any inkling that Shannon and I were acquainted, let alone involved romantically. This afforded us the chance to spend more time together, nurturing our mutual attraction until it blossomed into full-fledged love. One day, I phoned Shannon at her workplace and declared that I was ready. "I feel like I need to be with you more," I confessed. "We're practically inseparable every night." "You silly," she giggled through the receiver. "That's not enough," I insisted. "But we haven't even been carnal yet," she whispered, indicating that she was cautious of being overheard at work. "I'm certain lovemaking with you will be incredible," I reassured her. "You have no idea," she purred. "But you do realize I don't have the same assets as your wife," she pointed out. "What does that matter?" I countered. "What truly makes lovemaking amazing is being with someone you love and genuinely want to please." Then she said it. Tears brimmed in her eyes, her voice quivering. It was as if she had been waiting for me to reciprocate. "I love you too, Mark, and I promise it'll always be this way. You can have every part of me whenever you want. I'm yours," she poured out. I was taken aback. No one, not even Anne in our youth, had ever expressed their love for me so eloquently and passionately. "And no, I've never said anything like that to anyone before you," she declared solemnly. "Not even that idiot CJ." "I never doubted it," I responded. "I'm just curious about how soon we can proceed. We're following Sarah's plan. The call this morning was precisely what we were waiting for." The ironic aspect of all this was my sincere belief that fate played a hand in bringing us together. While we meticulously planned, we took great care not to be seen together for weeks. Yet acquaintances of ours kept approaching each of us, divulging suspicions about our significant other's infidelity. We had to feign ignorance, which bordered on a comedic farce akin to Shakespearean proportions. It seemed that only CJ and Anne suspected that we were aware, presuming their superiority over everyone else. Finally, my faux business trip arrived. It was a ruse, but it served its purpose. Fortunately, Shannon's mother conveniently fell ill around the same time. The illusion of both of us being out of town emboldened the swindlers, leading to that pivotal phone call. Things didn't unfold as smoothly as we anticipated. Both Shannon and I had anticipated the call to come on Friday night. That's why I scheduled the truck to arrive on Sunday morning. I wanted to give the lovebirds a couple of days to relish each other's company before everything unraveled. Nevertheless, Shannon and I relished the moment of triumph. As I answered the call, I addressed the voice of the woman he had been married to for over 20 years. "Who else can answer my phone?" I replied gleefully. Shannon approached and embraced me, lending me a strength I never knew I possessed. "Why on earth are you calling me?" I demanded. "I am your wife," she replied.
Mark, dear, I need to tell you something, and you probably won't like it. I think the simplest way to do this is to inform you that in the long run, it will benefit both of us. It may not seem like it now, but I just burst out laughing. And he laughed too. I couldn't believe he was laughing at me. CJ went downstairs to see what was happening with the damn trucks. I wish CJ had been by my side. "So why the hell are you laughing?" I queried. "I'm being serious." "Well, the other day someone was talking to me and said, 'You'll leave me in the lurch,'" he said, still in that same chuckling tone. He really knew how to get under my skin. Well, in a moment he'll be laughing out of the other side of his mouth. And that's what it's all about. This time I was determined to outsmart him. "But let me tell you, I have some news for you," he continued, "and you'll soon find out what it is. Then you'll have to dine alone." "What on earth are you talking about?" I questioned. "I don't think it was your idea at all." He chuckled. "I think this is CJ's scheme. Hell, he knew about me and CJ. He mentioned overhearing some people talking about it, probably my nosy neighbors. I had to try to salvage the situation. No, to hell with it all. I had to follow through with it. Mark, I'm leaving you," I declared. "I want a divorce." I put as much conviction into my voice as I could muster. But all he did was laugh even harder. "Your letter to me gave me pause and made me wonder why." "But I think you felt compelled to set things right," he chuckled. His words sent a shiver down my spine. Was this idiot psychic? Nobody knew about that blasted letter. Even CJ had no clue that I had penned a letter to Mark. The letter was supposed to accompany the divorce papers, detailing my sentiments about our marriage and where we went wrong. It also outlined precisely what Mark needed to do to win me back from CJ. "Mark, we need to discuss this," I muttered. "I think we should do it when you get home." "Just remember this, my girl. When you look at the sky," he crooned, "you can see the stars and still not see the light." "Mark, are you eating?" I exclaimed in disbelief. I called the idiot to inform him we were finished and he was singing. He feigned delight at my departure to rattle me. "Mark, if you don't make changes, we're headed for divorce," I warned. It's too late. For that, honey, oh, how painful it is," he replied. And in the background, I heard a woman's voice murmuring something about being the only woman he better call Sweet Mark. "It's never too late," I countered. "Why is it too late, Mark? And who is that woman next to you?" "Because I've already left," he warbled. "And I feel stronger, and I sing this victory song. Ooh, oh my God, ooh, ooh." "What the hell do you mean you already left?" I yelled into the phone. Suddenly, the dread I had been feeling all morning intensified. It was akin to how Wile E. Coyote feels just before the boulder he dropped on the Roadrunner starts looming over his own head. I strained to hear Mark's response, but all I heard was beeping. I flung the phone onto the bed beside me just as CJ burst into the room. The fear etched on his face was palpable. "You need to get dressed and go downstairs," he instructed. I hastily threw on a robe and cinched it tightly. In the living room stood a formidable black woman holding a tablet, looking as though she owned the place. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded. "Get out of my house." She regarded me with a measured gaze, then turned her back. "I'm feeling generous," she declared. "I understand your situation may evoke anger and resentment, but I won't tolerate rudeness or any delays. I need to vacate this house by day's end, and I aim to do so charitably. You have a few minutes to gather your personal belongings." "I'm not budging," I retorted. "This house belongs to me and my husband. It's nearly paid off." CJ called the police. "Yes, he did," she confirmed. "CJ called the police. That'll expedite matters. This house isn't nearly paid off, it's fully paid. This is likely to be the most humiliating moment of your life, ma'am." I stared at her as CJ dialed emergency. A few moments which felt like an eternity passed, granting me a chance to ponder. Then Mark's words echoed in my mind. What was that supposed victory song? What victory was he declaring? And then Hank K., the police chief and a personal friend of Mark and me, arrived. The woman strode past me, handing Hank a stack of papers. He perused them, nodding several times before approaching me. He glanced past me to CJ. "Is this him?" he inquired. "Who?" I repeated. "Don't be vexed," he said. "I'm just curious if this is the man you cheated on Mark with. It's audacious to have him here in Mark's house. Darn it, I forgot Mark sold the house." Before I could process his words, my mind went into overdrive. A rather cheerful woman pushed through the moving crew. "Is he?" she inquired. She sauntered around CJ and then flashed a smile at me. "They said you were naive, but I had to see for myself. What on earth are you talking about?" I demanded. "Half the women in town are wondering why you swapped your husband for a guy with less manhood in his pants and no income," she grinned. "There might be some truth to the idea that silicone in your chest rots your brain." "Follow my train of thought, Tina," the police chief interjected. He approached CJ slowly and quizzed. "Hey, buddy, do you know what a woman says to a guy with a really big male organ?" "No, I don't," CJ replied, looking bewildered. "How would you?" the chief retorted, and he and the plump woman erupted into laughter. "Can we proceed?" the black woman asked, wiping tears of mirth. "Sure," the chief consented. "Anne, pack your things and leave. Mark sold the house." "But he can't," protested. "This is my home. I chose it, even though he paid for it." "Anne," the chief intervened, "he purchased it with his own funds. His name is the sole one on the deed. He can do as he pleases." "Nonsense. A woman always gets the house in a divorce," I shouted. "Not always," the chief countered. "Moreover, you two aren't divorcing." "Indeed, that's correct," I acknowledged. "I intend to file tomorrow." "You should have done it last week, as that's when he sold the house," the chief remarked, chuckling. "Is this legal?" I inquired. "No," the chief replied. "It's a bit sneaky, much like sleeping with some pervert while your husband is toiling away at work to buy you all those luxuries. But it's entirely lawful." "Darn," I muttered. "CJ, contact my lawyer. I need to reach out to the bank and our investment firm," I instructed. "Do it outside," the black woman directed, waving her hand as her team began removing furniture from the house. "Where are they taking my furniture?" I demanded. "Your husband donated the furniture to a local charity auction house," she explained. "You can always repurchase it." "I handpicked every piece of this furniture, arranged it, and paid for it. Maybe you should have chipped in," Tina chuckled. "Oh, I forgot. Does hair bleach mess with your brain?" I brushed off her remark and dialed the bank. "Carly, it's Anne Clayton." "Yes, Mark's wife." "Carly, my lawyer will contact you soon to freeze our accounts, so I need to withdraw the money beforehand," I explained to Carly's overly cheery voice on the line. "Carly, first things first," I continued. "Let's handle this. I'll need enough funds to maintain the house and cover expenses for a while. Also, during the freeze, will only the current account funds be locked, or can Mark reroute his direct deposit?" "Just the current account funds," she clarified. "But I believe he switched his direct deposit last week when he left his job." "What did he do?" I gasped. "Oh, crap, Carly, I want to empty all our accounts and transfer them to a new one, all right?" "Are you certain about withdrawing everything?" she inquired. "Damn right," I affirmed. "Mark will land another job quicker than Tina can devour a bucket of chicken wings. But this money is all I have until the divorce is finalized. I'll need to issue you a check for that amount. Then you'll need to deposit it into your new account," she explained. "Fine," I snapped. "Just get it done." "Consider it done," she replied. "Once you arrive, I'll hand you a check for $3.11 and you can proceed." "What in the world are you talking about, Carly?" I erupted. "There's nearly $500,000 in that account." "There was," she began. "I know exactly how much was there," I seethed. "That's precisely what happened last week." "Chief, this has to be against the law," I protested. "It's not illegal," he clarified, "but it's pretty rotten." "Yeah," he added. "The bank enforces a minimum balance policy. If your balance drops below $50, you'll incur a $10 fee. You don't have enough remaining to cover even the fee." CJ handed me the phone and I began conversing with my attorney, my words interspersed with sobs. I recounted how Mark sold the house, drained our bank accounts, and liquidated all our investments. Logging into our investment account, I discovered Mark had cashed out everything, leaving just one share in the cheese company. "That's pretty clever," remarked my lawyer. "He got ahead of you. It's all perfectly legal. Until the divorce is initiated, he can do whatever he wants with his assets. So he took everything. He's likely going to cash out and stash it in offshore accounts beyond our reach. He's aiming to boost his wealth to the point where you won't get a dime in the divorce." "And quitting his job? Genius move. When he arrives in court broke and unemployed, you two can just part ways with no financial obligations." "I doubt he'll even show up," I remarked. "I think he skipped town. He left me before I could leave him. I have no clue where he went." "Hey," my lawyer inquired, "how do you plan to serve him with divorce papers if you don't know his whereabouts?" "Can I divorce him without all this hassle?" I questioned. "What about abandonment? It takes 3 years in this state. Do you have enough funds to last that long?" he queried. "Remember I just mentioned he drained all our damn money?" I seethed. "Well, no money means I can't afford your fees." Click, and again. All I heard was beeps, accompanied by the movers snickering under their breath. That's how my life spiraled into chaos. I temporarily crashed at my mom's place. Mark was thorough. He sold off or gave away all our possessions. He took all 3 cars, both his Mustangs and the winter Jeep. He kept my new Lexus, but I couldn't cover the payments, so it was repossessed. I consulted with several pro bono lawyers, and they all agreed I needed to stir up some serious trouble to counter his actions. Almost every lawyer, upon hearing the facts, deemed his actions brilliant and entirely lawful. There's no law saying a man must remain with his wife just because they're married, nor is there any prohibition against selling a jointly owned home. Mark had full entitlement to withdraw funds from our accounts, since he was the primary account holder. He came out on top. I tried reaching him, but his number was disconnected. There was a message there. I was certain he left me some sort of clue, but I was too dense to grasp it. Days turned into weeks with no word from him. Weeks stretched into months. I lost CJ within the first month. He struggled to make rent after his girlfriend left him for another guy the same day Mark abandoned me. What were the odds? One day, while listening to the radio, I broke down in tears. There was a band I vaguely knew of called the Eagles. Their lead singer, Glenn Frey, sang a song called Already Gone. The tale mirrored my life so closely that tears welled in my eyes. The gibberish Mark uttered or crooned to me on that day of his preemptive strike was lifted straight from this song. My life was filled with hard labor. I toiled 6 days a week alongside my mother cleaning hotel rooms. Many guests reminded me of my past life. I habitually took my blessings for granted, always believing I deserved more. After just a few days of struggling to survive, I began to regret how I treated my husband. It pained me to recall that I used to spend more on makeup in 2 weeks than I earned in my current salary. At 43, I knew my opportunities were limited. The only odd thing was that after 3 years of hardship and poor diet, I gained a few pounds and stopped coloring my hair. One day, upon returning home, I found an invitation awaiting me. The following day, I received an invite to a local cafe. Though unsigned, I knew it was from Mark. Suddenly it clicked. Mark could have emptied our accounts, but he left an odd sum. $3.11. It's been 3 years, 1 month, and 1 week since he left me. That's it. My sentence was served. My penance over. Damn, I wished I had realized this sooner. I could have dieted and reclaimed my figure. Then I realized it didn't matter. Mark always loved me. Blonde hair and ample chest were my choice. While I strove to look my best, a realization struck. I suddenly remembered the song's final line Mark quoted before he departed. It happens so often that we live in chains that we don't even know we have the key. There was a message in the invitation. It signified that we had come full circle. I was certain this meant he was ready to reintegrate me into his life. It suddenly dawned on me that I had been a fool. I was always in control. While I idled, Mark worked tirelessly to fulfill my every wish. The only time he refused was when I tried to coerce him into something he didn't want to do. When I attempted to divorce him, to leave him, he took it personally. True to form, he granted my wish and left first. Oddly, I had spent the last 3 years fearing the inevitable, expecting divorce papers to arrive sooner or later, yet they never did. Now I felt I understood why Mark still loved me and eagerly anticipated our reunion. I arrived at the bar slightly early. A disheveled bartender, showing signs of heavy drinking with his ruddy complexion, approached my table. "You've put on weight," he remarked. "How many donuts have you eaten? Have you drunk enough to forget your own shortcomings?" "What brings you here, CJ? I thought you still worked here," he retorted. "I received an invitation for lunch at a cafe across the street," I explained. "I came to gather courage." "This is odd," he observed. "Too much of a coincidence." "What do you mean?" I inquired. "I also received an invitation," he revealed. "Did yours include a cryptic riddle?" "It wasn't much of a mystery," I replied. "It was Mark's way of signaling he wants me back." "What exactly did it say?" he probed. "It read, 'We've come full circle. I'm ready to give you what you want,'" I recounted. "You're right," he acknowledged. "Yours differs from mine. Mine posed a question. Why does a squirrel hide nuts in its nest?" "I'm clueless about that," I admitted. "I believe it means Shannon wants me back," he concluded. "Squirrels hide nuts to protect them from birds. Birds is slang for women. Shannon's telling me she doesn't want me with other women. I think they colluded to reunite us after a period of suffering, wanting us to accept them on their terms." "Forget all this," I exclaimed angrily, abandoning all I had learned over the past 3 years. "If Mark wants me back, he'll have to work hard for it." With resolve, I stormed out of the bar and made my way across the street to the cafe. Taking a seat at a small table, I scanned the cafe and spotted CJ's entrance. He settled at a nearby table on the sidewalk, where 2 college guys played hacky sack. Seeing CJ, I pondered his riddle and realized his mistake. Despite waving desperately, he remained engrossed with the guys until he eventually noticed me. His wave and headshake left me puzzled. As CJ sat, the guys nearby lost control of their bag, which flew toward him and toppled his glass. Rising angrily, CJ was struck in the groin as another bag fell before him. One of the guys attempted to skillfully kick the bag back up but missed, fortunately leaving it undamaged. However, his foot landed a mighty blow to CJ's lap, eliciting a piercing scream. I hurried over as waiters tried to assist him, but all they could do was help him to his feet. As the ambulance arrived to take him away, I informed him, "Your interpretation was off." Through his pain, he groaned, "What?" "She didn't want your return," I clarified. "It's not about birds, it's about reproductive organs." "Doesn't matter," he grumbled, attempting to speak further but was interrupted by the appearance of a girl resembling a college student. Tall and fair-haired like me in my youth, she approached with a briefcase and gum in hand. "Are you Anna Clayton?" she inquired. "Yes," I answered sharply. Handing me a stack of papers, she explained, "His list of demands. Why don't you ask him yourself? You've been served," she spat. Glancing around the cafe, I spotted him. Suddenly, the riddle's meaning dawned on me. Full circle signified achieving what I desired, not necessarily Mark's return. This meant I got what I wanted. After Mark and I split up, we got divorced. The issue was it wasn't what I desired anymore. I yearned for the life I once knew and lost. To be frank, I was accustomed to living modestly. Most importantly, I longed to reconnect with Mark himself. Then I spotted him. He appeared well, even better than when we parted ways. He seemed content. However, he wasn't by himself. A woman accompanied him. She had red hair, was youthful, stunningly beautiful, and noticeably pregnant. Between them, holding each of their hands, was a little girl who perfectly blended their features. She sported Mark's hair color and her mother's vibrant green eyes. This petite girl gave me the same peculiar smile Mark had. Perhaps it's genetic, or she somehow sensed the situation and its significance, just like I did. The moment I saw them together, I realized it was truly over. There was no hope of rekindling with Mark. Emotionally, he was distant. There was no use in vying for his affection. This redhead wouldn't let him go. She offered him her heart, love, and undoubtedly her physical presence. She also bore him children. Reviewing the divorce papers, I noticed Mark's retaliatory stance against me. I aimed to secure financial compensation through legal means. I needed his money, but not him. In the end, I got neither. He divorced me, claiming abandonment, allowing him to retain all his assets and his newfound happiness. I glanced up from the paperwork for one final glimpse of the man I'd lost. But it was too late. He had already departed, leaving me with nothing but tears.
Story 4. Jack Thompson stood before the bathroom mirror, his calloused fingers working methodically at his navy blue tie. The silk fabric, a birthday gift from Emily, slipped through his fingers as he adjusted the knot with practiced precision. At 42, time had begun etching its story across his face. Subtle creases around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, while the early threads of gray at his temples hinted at years of quiet strain. The master bathroom's running water provided a steady backdrop to his morning routine, a countdown to Melissa's inevitable emergence. His wife's presence had a way of consuming spaces, turning their spacious, suburban home into a pressure cooker of expectations and judgment. Jack straightened his shoulders, preparing himself for another day of carefully measured words and calculated reactions. Their four-bedroom colonial house, with its pristine white exterior and meticulously maintained lawn, stood as a testament to suburban success. Inside, every room bore Melissa's distinctive touch. Expensive furniture arranged just so. Artwork selected for impact rather than meaning. Family photos that looked more like magazine shoots than genuine moments that a gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Daddy." The small voice carried through the door, instantly softening the tension in Jack's shoulders that he opened the door to find Emily, his 10-year-old daughter, clutching her backpack like a shield. Her school uniform, a pleated navy skirt and white blouse, showed signs of hurried dressing. One sock had rebelliously slipped down to her ankle, while her long brown hair remained untamed from sleep. "Come here, sweetheart." Jack knelt, his suit pants creasing against the marble tile. Emily stepped forward, and he noticed how she glanced quickly over her shoulder, checking for her mother's presence. The habit made his heart ache. He fixed her sock with gentle hands, smoothing her collar with paternal care. "Did you have breakfast yet?" Emily's eyes, a mirror of his own warm brown, darted away. "Mom said." She lowered her voice to barely a whisper, learned behavior from years of navigating Melissa's moods. "She says I should skip it, that I'm getting pudgy." Jack's jaw clenched, the muscle twitching beneath his clean-shaven skin. He took a deep breath, pushing down the anger that threatened to surface. "You're perfect exactly as you are." His voice remained steady, a skill honed through years of maintaining calm in the face of Melissa's barbs. "Let's get some proper breakfast in you before school." The hallway's hardwood floors creaked beneath their feet as they descended the curved staircase. Family portraits lined the wall, carefully staged images that captured Melissa's vision of perfection rather than genuine family moments. Jack noticed how Emily's smile grew progressively more forced in each successive year's photo. "Emily!" Melissa's voice cut through the morning quiet like a steel blade. "I told you to wait for me. We need to fix that disaster you call hair." Emily's small frame tensed, her shoulders drawing up toward her ears. Jack placed a protective hand on her back, gently guiding her toward the kitchen. "I'll do your hair while you eat," he promised softly. The kitchen, with its professional-grade appliances and gleaming granite countertops, served as Melissa's showpiece rather than a functional family space. Everything matched perfectly. The stainless steel refrigerator, double ovens, and gas range that rarely saw use beyond Jack's weekend cooking. Crystal light fixtures cast morning sunlight across the space in rainbow patterns. A beautiful effect that somehow felt cold rather than welcoming. Jack moved with practiced efficiency, preparing Emily's breakfast while keeping noise to a minimum. The whisper of bread against the toaster slots, the subtle crack of eggs against the bowl's edge. Years of walking on eggshells had taught him to minimize his presence. He watched Emily from the corner of his eye as she perched on the kitchen stool, her feet dangling above the floor, as he worked on Emily's hair, his fingers weaving strands into a neat braid. The sharp click of heels against hardwood announced Melissa's arrival. The sound grew louder, a countdown to confrontation that made Emily's shoulders tense beneath his hands. Melissa appeared in the doorway like an actress taking her mark, every detail calculated for maximum impact. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, styled to look effortlessly elegant. The red sole of her designer heels flashed with each step, matching the precise shade of her lipstick. At 38, she commanded attention with the kind of beauty that turned heads and stopped conversations. Her eyes narrowed at the domestic scene before her, perfect lips curving into a familiar expression of disdain. "Really, Jack?" The words dripped with contempt. "I specifically told Emily to watch her weight. She's already struggling to fit into her dance costumes." Jack tied off Emily's braid with a blue ribbon that matched her uniform, his movements deliberately calm. "She's a growing child who needs proper nutrition." He kept his voice level, though his hand lingered protectively on Emily's shoulder. Melissa's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the doorframe. "Of course you'd say that." Her gaze raked over him dismissively. "You've always lacked discipline. Some of us actually care about maintaining standards." Emily hunched lower over her plate, pushing the last bite of eggs around with her fork. Jack noticed her free hand had curled into a tight fist beneath the table, knuckles white with tension. "Time for school, princess," he said, deliberately using the endearment that made Melissa's eye twitch. "Go grab your jacket." Emily slid from her seat with careful quietness, years of practice evident in how she managed to leave the room without drawing her mother's attention. The sound of her shoes on the stairs faded, leaving Jack alone with Melissa's mounting displeasure. The kitchen's morning light caught the diamond on Melissa's finger as she stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming the homey smell of breakfast. "You're undermining me again, Jack." Her voice carried the sharp edge of barely contained irritation. "How is she supposed to learn proper values when you keep coddling her?" "Proper values don't include starving our daughter." Jack maintained eye contact, refusing to back down on this point. "Don't be dramatic." Melissa moved closer, her designer perfume creating an almost visible cloud between them. "You know, most men would be grateful to have a wife who cares about appearances, who maintains herself." Her hand trailed down his chest, a gesture that once would have thrilled him, but now made his skin crawl. "But you've always been different, haven't you?" Jack stepped back, careful to keep his expression neutral. "I need to get Emily to school." "Fine." Melissa's smile turned predatory. "I have plans today anyway. Don't wait up." The morning air carried a hint of autumn as Jack guided Emily to his charcoal gray sedan. The drive to school proceeded in comfortable silence, with Emily watching the passing suburban landscape through her window. Each mile seemed to lift a weight from her shoulders, her reflection in the rearview mirror growing more relaxed as they put distance between themselves and home. "Dad!" Her voice finally broke the quiet as they approached the school's brick facade. "Why does Mom always say those things?" Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel, leather creaking beneath his grip. He chose his words carefully, conscious of the delicate balance between honesty and protection. "Your mother, she has her own way of seeing the world. But that doesn't make her right. The other moms don't talk to their kids like that." Emily's observation carried years of accumulated hurt. Jack pulled into the drop-off lane, putting the car in park before turning to face his daughter. "Emily, look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "You are smart, kind, and beautiful. Don't let anyone, not even your mother, tell you different." A small smile tugged at Emily's lips, more precious than all of Melissa's carefully calculated gestures combined. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart. Have a good day." He watched her walk toward the school building, her backpack bouncing slightly with each step. Other parents hurried their children along, caught up in the morning rush, but Jack remained until Emily disappeared through the heavy doors. The thought of her growing up under Melissa's influence, absorbing toxic values and manipulative behaviors, gnawed at his conscience. The office building where Jack worked as a senior financial analyst rose 40 stories into the city skyline, its glass exterior reflecting the morning sun. Inside, his corner office offered views of the city sprawl, a reward for 15 years of dedicated service. Yet Melissa's voice often echoed in his head during meetings. You could be making partner if you weren't so focused on being daddy of the year. The day passed in a blur of spreadsheets and client meetings. Jack's reputation for meticulous attention to detail had earned him respect among his colleagues, though Melissa dismissed his careful approach as lacking ambition. By 5 o'clock, he was ready to head home, hoping to spend quality time with Emily before Melissa's influence could seep back in. The house stood quiet when he arrived, unusual for this time of day. Melissa's white luxury SUV sat in the driveway, but the usual sounds of reality TV shows or lengthy phone conversations were absent. As Jack hung his coat in the entryway, voices drifted from the living room. Melissa and Emily, engaged in what seemed to be an intimate conversation, that he paused, not wanting to interrupt what could be a rare positive moment between mother and daughter. Then Melissa's words froze him in place. You see, Emily, sometimes a woman needs more than just one man can provide. Melissa's voice carried that familiar tone of smug satisfaction. Your father, well, he's reliable, I'll give him that. Like a comfortable old shoe. But a woman like me has different needs. I don't understand, Mom. Emily's confusion was evident in her voice. Of course you don't, sweetie. You're still young. But let me tell you something. Experiencing a dark-colored man was the best decision I ever made. The way he makes me feel, it's nothing like your father could ever do. Jack's blood turned to ice in his veins. Though he'd harbored suspicions about Melissa's frequent appointments and girls' nights out, hearing her brag about her infidelity to their daughter made bile rise in his throat. His hand gripped the wall for support, knuckles white against the pale paint. But isn't that cheating? Emily's voice sounded small, uncertain, that Melissa's laugh cut through the air like broken glass. Oh, honey, weak men like your father, they never leave. They're too afraid, too dependent. Why do you think I married him? He's stable, predictable. The perfect cover for having a little fun on the side. Dad's not weak. Emily's protest carried a fierce loyalty that made Jack's heart simultaneously swell and shatter. Sweetie, your father is the definition of weak. He suspects what I do, but he'll never confront me. Never leave. Men like him are meant to provide while women like us enjoy life. Remember that, Emily. It's an important lesson about how the world really works. Jack backed away silently, each step measured and careful. The front door closed behind him without a sound, and he found himself in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel until his fingers ached. He drove aimlessly through suburban streets, past manicured lawns and perfect facades that hid their own secrets and lies. The conversation played on loop in his mind, each repetition stoking a fire in his chest that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with rage. The autumn sun set behind him as he circled the neighborhood, casting long shadows across familiar streets that suddenly felt alien. When he finally returned home, Jack played his part with frightening precision, the reliable, oblivious husband. He helped Emily with her math homework while Melissa texted on her phone, her red lips curving into secret smiles at messages he now knew came from her lover. He ate the takeout dinner Melissa had deigned to order, nodding at her stories about difficult customers at the boutique she managed, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. As he watched Melissa attempt to mold Emily in her image, saw the subtle ways she undermined their daughter's self-worth while promoting her twisted worldview, Jack knew he could no longer maintain the status quo. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore. It was about protecting Emily from becoming a reflection of her mother's poisonous values. That night, after Emily was asleep and Melissa was absorbed in her phone, Jack began to observe more carefully. He noticed how she always kept her phone angled away from him, how she took calls in another room, how her yoga classes never seemed to leave her sweaty or tired. Each detail built upon the last, creating a picture he could no longer ignore. The next few days passed in a fog of discovery. Jack started paying attention to details he'd previously ignored out of trust or willful blindness. Melissa's late-night texts, her carefully curated explanations for unexplained absences, the way she'd recently started keeping her phone locked with a new passcode, it all formed a damning pattern. The final confirmation came a week after overhearing the conversation with Emily. Melissa had left her laptop open while taking a shower, and a notification popped up from a messaging app Jack didn't recognize. His fingers moved before his conscience could object. The messages confirmed everything. Pictures, explicit texts, detailed plans for rendezvous. But it was the messages mocking him that truly sealed Melissa's fate. She and her lover laughed about Jack's ignorance, joked about his devotion to Emily, called him pathetic for being such a dedicated father instead of a real man. When Melissa emerged from the shower, wrapped in her expensive silk robe, she found Jack sitting calmly at the kitchen table. Her laptop was open in front of him, the screen casting a harsh glow across his features. Care to explain? His voice remained steady, betraying none of the turmoil beneath that. Melissa's eyes flicked to the screen, then back to his face. For a moment, surprise flickered across her features. Then remarkably she smiled. "Oh, honey." She sat across from him, crossing her legs with deliberate grace. "Did you really think you were enough? A man who spends his weekends at daddy-daughter tea parties instead of making something of himself. You told our daughter it's acceptable to cheat. I told her the truth about how the world works." Melissa leaned forward, her robe gaping slightly. "Face it, Jack. You won't leave. You can't. You're too worried about Emily, too concerned about maintaining stability. It's what makes you such a perfect husband and such an inadequate man." Jack stood slowly, his chair scraping against the tile floor. "You really believe that? Prove me wrong." Melissa's smile turned triumphant. "Walk away. Leave everything you've built. We both know you won't." Jack looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw not the beautiful, confident woman he'd married, but a hollow shell decorated with expensive clothing and cruel intentions. "You're right about one thing," he said quietly. "I won't leave Emily." Melissa's laugh followed him up the stairs. "See? Weak. Just like I said." But as Jack lay in bed that night, listening to Melissa's steady breathing beside him, he wasn't thinking about weakness. He was thinking about strength, the strength it would take to protect his daughter, to dismantle the comfortable life he'd built, to ensure that Emily grew up understanding that love shouldn't come with manipulation and cruelty. That he thought about Emily's small face, about how she hunched her shoulders when Melissa criticized her, about the way she was already learning to doubt herself. He thought about Melissa's words to their daughter, teaching her that betrayal was acceptable, that using people was normal, that love was a transaction rather than a bond. The moonlight filtered through their bedroom window, casting shadows across the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets Melissa had insisted on buying. Jack watched the patterns shift on the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities. The comfortable bedroom, with its designer furniture and carefully coordinated decor, suddenly felt like a prison of his own making. Did I end the darkness? Jack began to calculate. His mind, so adept at analyzing financial risks and opportunities, turned toward a different kind of assessment. Every asset, every account, every piece of evidence would need to be carefully documented. He'd need lawyers, the best he could find. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about protecting Emily from the toxic legacy Melissa seemed determined to pass on. No, Jack wouldn't leave Emily. But he would make damn sure Melissa did. The next morning, as dawn broke over their suburban sanctuary, Jack stood at his bathroom mirror again, adjusting his tie with the same careful precision he always had. But this time, his reflection showed something different in his eyes. Not the resignation of a man trapped in a loveless marriage, but the determination of a father ready to burn everything down to save what truly mattered. As he heard Melissa's shower start running, Jack allowed himself a small smile. She thought she knew him so well, had him so perfectly categorized. She'd never seen him truly angry, never witnessed the steel beneath his careful composure. She'd mistaken patience for weakness, dedication for dependency. Soon, she would learn just how wrong she was. The morning after his confrontation with Melissa, Jack sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, cursor blinking in the search bar. Best divorce lawyers in the area. The weight of his wedding ring felt like a shackle against his skin that a knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Thompson? His assistant, Rachel, stood in the doorway. Your 9 a.m. is here, but you also have a call from Emily's school. Jack's spine straightened. Put the school through first. The voice of Emily's teacher, Mrs. Martinez, carried concern through the phone line. Mr. Thompson, I wanted to discuss something that happened during lunch period today. Is Emily okay? Physically, yes, but she broke down crying when another student asked about her mother. She said some concerning things. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of things? Emily mentioned that her mother told her it's okay to cheat on people you're married to. That is what strong women do. Mrs. Martinez paused. Mr. Thompson, as a mandated reporter, I need to ask if everything is okay at home. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Jack kept his voice steady. Emily's mother and I are going through some changes. I'm handling it. We have excellent counseling resources. I'll take care of my daughter, Mrs. Martinez. Jack's tone remained firm but polite. Please let me know if you notice anything else concerning. After ending the call, Jack pulled up his contact list. His finger hovered over the name of an old college friend who'd become one of the city's top divorce attorneys. Mark Patterson had a reputation for being ruthless in court, especially in cases involving children. The call connected on the second ring. Jack Thompson? Haven't heard from you in ages. Mark, I need your help. Jack's voice was steel. How's your schedule this afternoon? For you? I'll make time. What's this about? Divorce. Need it done right. Need full custody. A pause. Those are big words, Jack. You sure about this? My wife is teaching our 10-year-old daughter that cheating is acceptable. That manipulating men is a sign of strength. Jack's free hand curled into a fist. I have evidence. Lots of it. And I need the best. Jesus. Mark's voice hardened. Come by at 2. Bring everything you have. And Jack, don't tell Melissa you're coming to see me. In fact, don't let her suspect anything's different. Already ahead of you, the law office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, all gleaming glass and polished marble. Mark's corner office offered a panoramic view of the city, but Jack barely noticed as he laid out his evidence. Screenshots, bank statements, records of unexplained absences. Mark reviewed everything with a professional eye, making notes on a yellow legal pad. This is good, Jack. Very good, but we need more. He looked up, expression grim. You said she's involving your daughter in this? She's trying to groom Emily to be like her. Jack's voice carried barely controlled rage, teaching her that loyalty means nothing, that using people is normal. That'll play well with the judge. Mark tapped his pen against the desk. But we need to document everything. Every inappropriate conversation. Every manipulation. Start keeping a journal. Record dates, times, exact words if possible. What about her lover? We'll need proof of the affair. But more importantly, we need to show how her behavior is affecting Emily. Mark leaned forward. Has she brought this man to your house? Not yet, but she's getting bolder. Perfect. When she does, and she will document it. Security cameras, timestamps, everything. Mark started typing on his computer. I'm filing for emergency custody evaluation. With what you've shown me, we can argue that her behavior is causing psychological harm to Emily. Jack nodded, his resolve strengthening. What else do you need? Everything. Bank statements showing unusual spending. Phone records. Evidence of her leaving Emily alone while she meets her lover. And most importantly, documentation of any conversations where she promotes infidelity or manipulative behavior to your daughter. I want full custody, Mark. Nothing less. Mark's eyes met his. With what you've shown me and what we're going to gather, she won't know what hit her. But Jack, he paused. Keep your cool. No matter what she does, no matter how much she provokes you, one wrong move, and she could turn this around. I've been keeping my cool for years. Jack stood straightening his tie. That's why she thinks she'll win. The drive home gave Jack time to think. He needed to be strategic, patient. Melissa's arrogance would work against her. She believed him too weak to act, too concerned with maintaining stability to risk everything. Emily was doing homework at the kitchen table when he arrived home. She looked up, relief crossing her face. Dad, can you help me with my science project? Of course, princess. He sat beside her, noting how she relaxed when Melissa wasn't around. What are we working on? The solar system. Mom said it's stupid to waste time on this stuff, but I think it's cool. Jack felt his jaw tighten. Your mom's wrong. Understanding how things work is never stupid. Mom says a lot of wrong things. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. Dad? You won't ever leave, right? Like Tommy's dad did. Jack turned to face his daughter fully. Emily, look at me. He waited until her eyes met his. I will never leave you. Ever. No matter what happens with your mom and me, you're stuck with me forever. Understand? Emily nodded, then suddenly threw her arms around him. Jack held her close, feeling her small frame shake with suppressed tears. Over her head, he caught sight of Melissa standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of contempt and calculation. Having another daddy-daughter moment? Melissa's voice dripped sarcasm. Emily, you're getting too old for this clingy behavior. Emily's arms tightened around Jack before she reluctantly pulled away. He watched the walls go up behind her eyes, a child's defense mechanism against her mother's criticism. I'm not being clingy, Emily muttered, turning back to her homework. Dad's helping me with science? Melissa stalked into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Science won't teach you how to succeed in life. She perched on the edge of the counter, her designer dress riding up. I have a meeting tonight. Don't wait up. A meeting? Jack kept his voice neutral, though his hand instinctively moved to cover Emily's. It's already 7. Some of us have ambition, Jack. Melissa's smile was razor-sharp. Unlike those who waste their evenings playing scientist. At least finish your homework first, Emily, Jack said, ignoring the barb. Then we can start on your project. Melissa's phone chimed. Her fingers flew across the screen, a secretive smile playing at her lips. I need to go. Emily, remember what we talked about. Strong women make their own rules. After she left, Emily's shoulders slumped. I don't want to be strong like Mom. There are different kinds of strength, Jack replied, his mind already cataloging Melissa's behavior for his documentation. The strongest people I know are kind and honest. Over the next few weeks, Jack built his case methodically. He installed security cameras for Emily's safety. He told Melissa, who barely paid attention. His phone became a repository of recorded conversations and time-stamped photos. Every inappropriate comment, every unexplained absence, every moment of emotional manipulation was carefully documented. One Tuesday afternoon, Jack received a text from their neighbor, Mrs. Anderson. Thought you should know unfamiliar car in your driveway. Black Mercedes. Been there an hour. Jack's fingers tightened around his phone. He'd been waiting for this. Emily? At my house. She came over to play with Katie after school. Your wife said it was arranged. Keep her there, Jack texted back. I'm on my way home. He called Mark from the car. It's happening. She brought him to the house. Remember, evidence first, confrontation later, Mark cautioned. Get photos, video if possible. Times, dates, everything. Jack parked a block away, approaching his house on foot. The black Mercedes sat in the driveway, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Through the security app on his phone, he accessed the cameras he'd installed. The footage made his blood boil. Melissa and her lover, clearly visible through the living room windows. Got it, he told Mark. All on camera. Good. Now get Emily and stay away until they leave. Don't confront them. Not yet. Jack walked to the Andersons' house, where Emily was working on homework with Katie. Mrs. Anderson met him at the door, her expression sympathetic. The kids don't know anything, she said quietly. But Jack, this isn't right. I know. His voice was steel. Thank you for looking out for Emily. That evening, after the Mercedes had gone and Emily was in bed, Melissa sauntered into the kitchen where Jack sat reviewing work emails. Her hair was slightly mussed, lipstick perfectly reapplied. Productive meeting? Jack asked mildly. Very. Melissa poured herself a glass of wine. Though I'm sure it wasn't as exciting as your evening of domesticity. Emily needed help with her project. Melissa laughed. Of course she did. You know, Jack, this is exactly why I need outside interests. You're just so. She waved her hand dismissively. Predictable. Jack looked up from his laptop. And you're getting careless. The wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Excuse me? Bringing him here? To our house. Jack's voice remained calm. Where could Emily have walked in? Melissa's eyes narrowed. Please. Emily was at the Andersons. I made sure of that. Using our neighbors to facilitate your affair. Classy. Oh, look who finally grew a spine. Melissa set her glass down with exaggerated care. What are you going to do about it, Jack? Leave? We both know you won't. You're too worried about Emily, about stability, about your precious routine. Jack closed his laptop slowly. You really believe that's weakness, don't you? Caring about our daughter. I believe it's pathetic. Melissa leaned forward, her expression contemptuous. Real men take what they want. They don't play house and help with science projects. Like your lover. Jack's voice carried a dangerous edge. The one who's married with 3 kids of his own? Melissa's face went still. How did I know everything, Melissa? Every detail. Every lie. Every manipulation. He stood, gathering his things. You're right about one thing, though. I won't leave Emily. Ever. Is that a threat? Melissa's laugh was brittle. You forget, Jack. I'm the one people believe. The charming wife. The successful businesswoman. You're just boring. Reliable. No one would ever believe you over me. Jack paused at the kitchen door. We'll see about that. He spent that night in his home office, reviewing the footage from the security cameras. Every frame was a nail in the coffin of his marriage. Every recorded conversation another piece of evidence. He thought about Emily, about the subtle ways Melissa's behavior was shaping their daughter's view of relationships, of trust, of love itself. His phone buzzed a text from Mark. Meeting tomorrow. Found something interesting in the financial records? Jack sent back a single word. Good. The financial records spread across Mark's desk told a story of calculated deception. Credit card statements revealed hotel charges, expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases, all carefully timed to coincide with Melissa's business meetings and yoga classes. She's not as clever as she thinks, Mark said, highlighting another suspicious transaction. These charges match the dates you recorded her with the lover. Perfect correlation. Jack studied the statements. She's using our joint account for this? That's the best part. Mark pulled up another document. She opened a separate credit card 6 months ago. Used your joint income on the application, but kept the statements paperless. Only reason we found it was the automatic payment drawing from your shared account. Can we use this? Oh, we're going to use all of it. Mark's smile was predatory. But there's more. Your wife's lover? His wife just hired Karen Mitchell. The divorce attorney? The same. Seems your wife's boyfriend isn't as discreet as she thought. Karen's willing to share information legally obtained, of course, that could help our case. Jack absorbed this information, his mind already calculating the implications. What's our next move? Keep documenting. Keep watching. And Jack. Mark's expression turned serious. Be ready. When cornered, people like your wife tend to lash out. She's getting bolder, more careless. That makes her dangerous. The warning proved prophetic. That evening, Jack came home to find Melissa in Emily's room, perched on the bed while their daughter sat curled into herself at the headboard. Your father's going to leave us, Melissa was saying, her voice dripping false concern. Men always do. That's why smart women need to look out for themselves. Dad wouldn't leave, Emily protested, but her voice wavered. Oh, sweetie, he's a man. They're all the same. Even your father, with his perfect daddy act. Men leave, Emily. The smart ones cheat first, but the weak ones, like your father, they just disappear. Jack stepped into the doorway. That's enough, Melissa. She turned, a practiced smile, sliding into place. We're having a mother-daughter talk. No, you're poisoning our daughter with your twisted worldview. Jack's voice was quiet but firm. Emily, go get ready for bed. I need to speak with your mother. Emily scrambled off the bed, shooting a grateful look at Jack as she hurried past. Once she was gone, Melissa's smile turned sharp. Poisoning? I'm teaching her valuable life lessons. She stood, smoothing her designer dress. Someone needs to prepare her for reality. Your reality? Jack stepped into the room, where trust means nothing and loyalty is for fools. My reality is the only one that matters. Melissa moved closer, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. Face it, Jack. I've already won. Emily will learn what I teach her, because you're too weak to stop me. too concerned with being the perfect father to see what's really happening. And what's that? I'm molding her into a survivor, someone who understands power. Her smile was triumphant. While you teach her about science projects and kindness, I'm teaching her how the world really works. And do you know the best part? She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. She'll thank me for it one day. Jack met her gaze steadily. No, she won't. Because you won't be around to finish your lessons. Melissa's laugh was sharp. Is that right? And who's going to stop me? You. She trailed a finger down his chest. Poor, predictable Jack. Still thinking you can protect her from reality. You've mistaken patience for weakness, Melissa. That's going to cost you. Empty threats don't suit you, darling. She stepped back, reaching for her phone. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans tonight. With Richard? Jack kept his voice casual. Or, is it his wife you're meeting? Melissa froze, her fingers tightening around her phone. What did you say? Richard Williams. Married, 3 kids, lives in Highland Park. Jack watched the color drain from her face. His wife hired Karen Mitchell last week. Interesting timing. You've been spying on me? Melissa's voice rose slightly. No need. You've gotten sloppy, bringing him to our house, using our accounts to fund your affair. Jack moved toward the door. But please, don't let me keep you from your plans. I'm sure Richard's wife would love to know more about your lessons for Emily. You wouldn't dare test me. Jack paused in the doorway. Oh, and Melissa? Those credit card statements you thought were so well hidden? Not hidden enough. He left her standing in Emily's room, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. In the hallway, he heard Emily's voice drifting from the bathroom, singing softly to herself as she got ready for bed. The sound strengthened his resolve later that night. As Jack reviewed the day's recordings, a text from Mark lit up his phone. Karen sent the files. You're going to want to see these first thing tomorrow. Jack glanced at the ceiling, where he could hear Melissa's heels clicking back and forth as she paced in their bedroom. Each step echoed like a countdown, marking time until her carefully constructed world began to crumble. His phone buzzed again, an alert from the security system. Through the app, he watched Melissa slip out of the house, her movements furtive in the darkness. Another notification showed her getting into an unfamiliar car idling at the corner. Jack opened his documentation file and began typing, recording each detail with methodical precision. In the morning, he would take everything to Mark. The new footage, the credit card statements, the recorded conversations with Emily. But for now, he waited, gathering evidence as Melissa's desperation drove her toward increasingly reckless decisions. She was playing right into his hands, and she didn't even know it. The morning light filtered through Mark's office windows as Jack reviewed the files from Karen Mitchell. Photos, text messages, and emails painted a damning picture not just of Melissa's affair with Richard, but of a pattern of manipulation that stretched back months. Richard's wife had him followed, Mark explained, sliding another folder across the desk. Professional investigator. Everything's documented, time-stamped, and admissible in court. Jack studied a photo of Melissa entering a hotel, Richard's hand possessively on her lower back. Does she know about the investigation? Not yet, but she will. Mark leaned back in his chair. Richard's being served divorce papers this afternoon. Karen's team is thorough. They're hitting him with everything at once. Melissa's name features prominently in the filing. She'll be furious. That's what we're counting on. Mark's expression was grim. Angry people make mistakes. Big ones. Jack's phone buzzed a text from Mrs. Anderson. Your wife just came home. She seems upset. Emily's still here with Katie. It's starting, Jack said, showing Mark the message. Remember the plan. Let her spiral, but protect Emily. Document everything. When Jack arrived home, he found Melissa in their bedroom, hurling clothes into a suitcase. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, mascara smeared beneath her eyes. Going somewhere, he asked from the doorway. Melissa whirled to face him. You smug bastard. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Find out what? Don't play innocent. She stalked toward him, finger jabbing at his chest. You've been talking to his wife, haven't you? Feeding her information? I haven't talked to anyone's wife. Jack kept his voice level. But it seems Richard's been keeping secrets from you. He said he was handling it. Melissa's laugh held a hysterical edge. Said his wife was clueless, that everything was under control. Now she's filing for divorce. And his lawyer is calling me a homewrecker. Imagine that. Jack leaned against the doorframe. Someone's perfect plan falling apart. This is your fault. Melissa grabbed a vase from the nightstand and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, water and flowers spraying across the carpet. You, in your pathetic investigation, following me, gathering evidence, did you think I wouldn't notice? Like you noticed Richard's wife doing the same thing. Melissa's face contorted. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I'll take everything. The house, the money, Emily. When I'm done, you'll be lucky if you see her on holidays. Is that what you think? Jack's calm seemed to infuriate her further. That a judge will give you custody after hearing how you're teaching our 10-year-old daughter to manipulate men? How you bring your lover to our house while she's at the neighbor's? My word against yours. Melissa's smile was savage. And we both know who people believe. The dedicated mother, trying to protect her daughter from an obsessive, controlling husband. Is that the story you're going with? Jack pulled out his phone, pulled up a video. Melissa's voice filled the room. Sometimes a woman needs more than just one man can provide. Experiencing a dark-colored man was the best decision I ever made. The color drained from Melissa's face. You recorded me? You recorded yourself. Security cameras, remember? The ones you never bothered to ask about. Jack pocketed the phone. Every conversation with Emily, every time you brought him here, every manipulation, it's all documented. Melissa lunged for him, nails raking toward his face. Jack caught her wrists easily, holding her at arm's length. Let go of me, she shrieked, struggling against his grip. So you can claim I attacked you? Not happening. He released her, stepping back. Everything that happens in this house is recorded, Melissa. Everything. She staggered back, chest heaving. This isn't over. Actually, it is. Check your email. My lawyer sent over the divorce papers an hour ago. Jack straightened his tie. I'd start packing if I were you. The emergency custody hearing is tomorrow morning. Emergency custody? Melissa's voice rose to a screech. You can't do this. Already done. The judge was very interested in the recordings of you teaching our daughter about the benefits of infidelity. Jack turned to leave. Oh, and Melissa? Richard's not going to be much help. He's a bit busy with his own divorce proceedings. He left her standing amid the scattered clothes and broken glass, her curses following him down the hallway. His phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Papers served. Filing confirmed. Ready for tomorrow? More than ready. Jack replied that he drove to the Andersons' house, where Emily was finishing homework with Katie. When she saw him, her face lit up. Dad, can we work on the solar system project? I'm almost done with my math. Of course, princess. He hugged her close, feeling her small arms wrap around his waist. But first, we need to talk about some changes that are happening. Mrs. Anderson caught his eye, nodding in understanding. Katie, let's go start dinner prep. Once they were alone, Emily looked up at him. Is it about Mom? I heard her yelling when she came home. Yes, sweetheart, it is. Jack sat beside her on the Andersons' couch. Your mom and I, we're going to be living apart for a while. And tomorrow, we have to go see a judge to talk about where you'll be staying. Emily's fingers twisted in her shirt. Will I have to choose? No, baby. You don't have to choose anything. That's my job to make sure you're safe and taken care of. He brushed her hair back from her face. Do you trust me? Always. Emily's voice was small but certain. Then trust that everything I'm doing is to protect you. Your mom, she's made some choices that aren't good for our family. But that's not your fault, and it doesn't change how much I love you. Emily was quiet for a moment. Mom's wrong about you, isn't she? About you being weak. What do you think? I think... Emily straightened her shoulders. I think it takes more strength to be kind than to be mean. That's what you always say. Jack pulled her close, his heart swelling with pride and determination. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, he held his daughter, knowing that every step of his plan was worth it to protect her from Melissa's toxic influence. His phone buzzed again. Mark confirming the final details for the morning's hearing. In his mind, Jack could hear Melissa's rage echoing through their house, but it no longer touched him. She had mistaken his patience for weakness, his planning for passivity. Tomorrow, she would learn just how wrong she'd been. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone facade gleaming in the morning sun. Jack adjusted Emily's collar, noting how she'd insisted on wearing the blue dress he bought her for her last birthday, not the designer outfit Melissa had tried to force on her. "Remember what we talked about," he said softly. "Just tell the truth. That's all anyone needs." Emily nodded, her small hand gripping his tightly. "Will Mom be there?" "Yes, but you won't have to talk to her. Judge Roberts just wants to hear what's been happening at home." Mark met them at the courthouse steps, his briefcase bulging with evidence. "Ready?" He looked at Emily with a gentle smile. "You must be the famous Emily. Your dad talks about you all the time." Emily managed a small smile. "Is it okay if I stay with Dad?" "That's exactly what we're here to make sure happens." Mark's expression hardened as he looked past them. "Heads up! Your wife's arrived." Melissa strode up the courthouse steps like she was walking a runway, her designer heels clicking against the stone. Her lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, walked beside her. Both women radiated confidence. "Emily," Melissa's voice carried across the courtyard. "Come here, sweetie. Mom needs to talk to you before we go in." Emily's grip on Jack's hand tightened. "I don't want to." "You don't have to," Jack assured her. Melissa reached them, her perfume overwhelming in the morning air. "Emily, stop being difficult. This is important." "Mrs. Thompson," Mark interrupted smoothly. "All communication should go through counsel. You know that." "I want to talk to my daughter." Melissa's smile was brittle. "Surely a mother has that right?" "Not when there's an emergency custody order pending." Mark positioned himself between Melissa and Emily. "Judge Roberts will see Emily in chambers, with child services present. Those are the rules." Melissa's lawyer touched her arm. "He's right. Let's go inside." The courtroom was already busy, the morning docket filled with similar cases. Jack noticed Richard's wife sitting in the back row, her expression grim but satisfied. The sight of her seemed to throw Melissa off balance. "What is she doing here?" Melissa hissed at her lawyer. "Being helpful," Mark answered instead. "Mrs. Williams has some interesting testimony for the judge." Color drained from Melissa's face. "You can't." "We can and will." Mark's smile was predatory. "Every witness, every piece of evidence, every recording. It all comes out today." The bailiff called their case. Judge Roberts, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, looked up from her files. "Custody hearing for Emily Thompson. I understand we have an emergency petition?" "Yes, Your Honor." Mark stepped forward. "We have extensive evidence of Mrs. Thompson's inappropriate behavior, including recordings of her actively teaching the minor child that infidelity and manipulation are acceptable behaviors." Melissa's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, these recordings were made without my client's knowledge or consent, in a house with clearly posted security notices," Mark countered. "Mrs. Thompson signed the installation agreement herself. We have the documentation." Judge Roberts peered over her glasses. "I'd like to speak with Emily first." In chambers, Jack knelt beside Emily. "Remember just the truth." Emily nodded, then surprised everyone by turning to face her mother. "I'm not lying for you anymore, Mom. I'm going to tell her everything." Melissa's mask cracked. "Emily, think about what you're doing. After everything I've taught you, that's exactly what I'm going to tell her about." Emily's voice was small but firm. "All the things you taught me. About cheating, about using people, about Dad being weak because he's nice. You ungrateful little..." Melissa started forward, but her lawyer grabbed her arm. "Mrs. Thompson, control yourself." The judge's gavel cracked against the wood. "Mrs. Thompson, one more outburst and you'll be held in contempt." "Emily, please come with me." As Emily followed Judge Roberts to her chambers, she walked tall, no longer hunching her shoulders. Jack watched her go, pride mixing with determination. Melissa's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and they were only getting started. "While they talk," Judge Roberts announced, "I'd like to review the evidence." "Mr. Patterson, you mentioned recordings?" Mark began playing the videos. Melissa's conversations with Emily, her bragging about her affair, her systematic attempts to undermine Jack's relationship with their daughter. With each recording, Melissa's expression grew more desperate. That's not how it happened, she protested. I was teaching her about empowerment, about being strong. By teaching a 10-year-old about your affair, Judge Roberts' voice could have frozen fire. By deliberately undermining her relationship with her father? Please explain to me how that constitutes good parenting. Melissa's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently in her ear, but Melissa shoved her away. You don't understand. Jack's weak. Pathetic. Emily needs to learn. Mrs. Thompson. The judge's tone cut through her rant. You're not helping your case. When Emily returned from chambers, her eyes were red, but her expression was resolute. She walked straight to Jack, ignoring Melissa's attempts to catch her attention. The truth, she whispered to him. Just like you said, Judge Roberts shuffled her papers, her expression grave. Based on the evidence presented, including Emily's testimony and these recordings, I'm prepared to rule on temporary custody. Melissa stood, her designer dress rustling. Your Honor, I can explain. Sit down, Mrs. Thompson. You've explained quite enough. The judge's gaze swept the courtroom. I'm granting temporary full custody to Mr. Thompson, with Mrs. Thompson's visitation to be supervised and at the discretion of family services. Melissa's scream of rage echoed through the courthouse parking lot. This isn't over. You can't take my daughter. Jack guided Emily toward their car, Mark flanking them protectively. Behind them, Melissa's lawyer tried desperately to control her client. Mrs. Thompson, please. We can appeal. Appeal? Melissa's laugh held a hysterical edge. I don't need to appeal. I'll show everyone what he really is. Emily. She lunged forward, her heels scraping against the pavement. Tell them you want to stay with me. Emily pressed closer to Jack. No, Mom. I told the truth. About everything. Everything? Melissa's face contorted. You told them about our private talks? Our special lessons? About how you said cheating is okay. How you called Dad weak for being nice. Emily's voice grew stronger. Yes, I told them everything. You ungrateful little... Melissa started forward, but her lawyer grabbed her arm. One more step and I call security, Mark warned. The judge's order is clear. No unsupervised contact. Jack opened the car door for Emily. Get in, sweetheart. We're going home. Home. Melissa's laugh turned sharp. You think you've won? That house is mine. Everything in it is mine. Check the property records, Mark replied smoothly. The house is in Jack's name. Always has been. As they drove away, Emily watched her mother's diminishing figure in the side mirror. She's really mad, Dad. I know, Princess. But she can't hurt us anymore. Jack caught her eye in the rearview mirror. How about we get your things packed? I have a surprise planned. We're moving to somewhere even better. Somewhere she won't find us right away. While Emily packed upstairs, Jack implemented the next phase of his plan. He'd arranged for a moving company to arrive within the hour. Everything important documents, photos, Emily's treasured possessions was already safely stored elsewhere. His phone buzzed with a text from Mark. She's filing an emergency appeal. Won't work, but it'll keep her busy. You have time. Perfect. Jack had calculated this precisely. Melissa would spend hours with her lawyer, trying to overturn the custody ruling. By the time she realized what else he had planned, it would be too late. The movers worked efficiently, following Jack's detailed instructions about which items to take. Emily's room, his home office, the family photos he'd carefully curated, everything that mattered was quickly loaded into the truck. What about Mom's stuff? Emily asked, watching the movers work. Your mother has different plans for her things. Jack checked his watch. Right on schedule. The moving truck pulled away. Jack led Emily to his car. Ready for the surprise? They drove across town to a gated community on the north side, far from their old neighborhood, far from Melissa's usual haunts. The house he'd secretly purchased 3 weeks ago stood welcoming, its fresh paint and manicured lawn a stark contrast to the emotionally charged home they'd left behind. This is ours. Emily's eyes widened as they pulled into the driveway. All ours. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, and he smiled, a perfect spot for your science projects. The movers arrived shortly after, and Jack supervised as they unloaded their belongings. Emily explored the house, her excitement growing with each new discovery. Dad, there's a window seat in my room. Perfect for reading, right? Jack helped her arrange her books on the built-in shelves. "This is our fresh start, Emily. Just you and me." His phone buzzed again. "Mark, appeal denied. She's headed your way. Everything ready?" "Right on schedule," Jack texted back. "Dad." Emily held up a framed photo of their old house. "What about all Mom's stuff?" Jack checked his watch. "Your mother's about to learn an important lesson about consequences." Back at their old house, Melissa's arrival was everything Jack had anticipated. Her SUV screeched into the driveway, and she burst through the front door, ready to reclaim her territory. What she found stopped her cold. The house was half empty, stripped of Jack and Emily's presence. But her belongings, her expensive clothes, her designer shoes, her carefully curated collections were arranged in neat piles in the backyard. Next to a can of gasoline and a box of matches, her phone rang. Jack's name flashed on the screen. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Consequences," Jack replied calmly. "Check your email." Melissa pulled up her messages, her hands trembling. There, in her inbox, were dozens of emails, all the evidence of her affair, her manipulation, her toxic lessons to Emily, sent to everyone in her contact list. Family, friends, colleagues, clients. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. "I already did. 10 minutes ago." Jack's voice was steel. "Your reputation, your social standing, your carefully crafted image, it's all going up in flames. Literally, my things are about to become ashes. Fitting, don't you think?" Through the phone, Jack heard Melissa's heels clicking frantically across the backyard patio. "You can't do this. Those are designer pieces worth thousands. Like the thousands you spent on hotel rooms with Richard." Jack's voice remained steady. "Or the jewelry he bought you with our joint account." "I'll call the police." "For what?" "Setting fire to my own property." Jack's laugh was cold. "The house is in my name. The accounts are frozen. Everything in that yard legally belongs to me." A notification pinged on Melissa's phone. Then another, and another. Her social media exploded with messages as friends and colleagues received Jack's emails. "My reputation." Her voice cracked. "You're destroying everything." "No, Melissa. You destroyed everything. The moment you decided to teach our daughter that loyalty means nothing. That manipulation is strength." Jack's tone hardened. "I'm just making sure everyone sees you for who you really are." Melissa's phone lit up with a call. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "Go ahead, answer it," Jack suggested. "I'm sure he'd love to explain why his wife's lawyer just released all their evidence to your entire social circle." Her scream of rage echoed through the phone. "I'll get you for this. I'll take you to court. You'll what? Tell them how you brought your lover into our home. How you taught our 10-year-old daughter that cheating is acceptable. How you mocked me for being a devoted father." Jack's voice cut through her threats. "Check your email again. I just forwarded everything to your boss." The boutique where Melissa worked catered to the city's elite. Her carefully cultivated image of sophistication and class was essential to her success. As she opened the email, she saw her career crumbling before her eyes. "You've ruined me," she whispered. "No, you did that yourself. I'm just making sure you can't ruin Emily too." In the background, Jack heard the distinct sound of a match striking. He'd positioned cameras in the backyard, knowing Melissa's tendency for dramatic gestures. Sure enough, she stood among her piled possessions, a lit match trembling in her hand. "What are you doing?" he asked mildly. "If you're going to destroy everything, I'll do it myself." The match fell from her fingers, catching on a silk blouse. Flames licked upward, consuming designer labels and expensive fabrics. "Goodbye, Melissa." Jack ended the call as the fire spread, consuming the physical remnants of their marriage just as thoroughly as Melissa's actions had destroyed its foundation, their new home. Emily looked up from arranging her books. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect, princess." He helped her hang a poster of the solar system on her new wall. "How about we get pizza to celebrate our first night here? Can we eat in the backyard? Like a picnic?" "Absolutely." As they sat in their new backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Jack's phone buzzed with updates. Photos of Melissa's meltdown circulated through social media. Her lover's wife had released their evidence. The boutique owner had called an emergency meeting of the board. "Dad, Emily's voice pulled him back to the present. Do you think Mom will try to find us? She might, Jack answered honestly. But she can't hurt us anymore. We have a fresh start here. Because you're strong, Emily said with certainty. Not weak like she said. We're both strong. Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders. And we're going to be just fine. The next few weeks proved him right. Melissa's attempts to salvage her reputation failed spectacularly. The boutique fired her, unwilling to risk their elite clientele. Richard, facing his own divorce proceedings, cut all contact. Her carefully cultivated social circle, faced with undeniable evidence of her true nature, turned their backs. She filed for custody again, desperate to regain control. But the court had seen too much: the recordings, the testimonies, the evidence of her attempts to poison Emily's understanding of relationships and trust. The court finds no reason to modify the existing custody arrangement, Judge Roberts declared at the hearing. Mrs. Thompson's visitation will remain supervised until she completes court-mandated therapy and parenting classes. Melissa's last-ditch effort came in the form of a letter delivered to their new home despite Jack's attempts at privacy. She must have hired someone to find us, he muttered. Reading the envelope, the letter was typical Melissa, alternating between threats and manipulation, claiming she'd changed while simultaneously blaming everyone else for her downfall. Jack started to tear it up, then paused. Emily, he called. Come here for a minute. She came from her room, where she'd been working on a new science project. What's that? A letter from your mother. He held it out. Would you like to read it? Emily considered the envelope, then shook her head. No, I don't need to. Are you sure? It's okay if you want to. I'm sure. Emily's smile was strong and genuine. Mom only writes things that hurt people. I don't want to read that anymore. Jack watched his daughter return to her project, pride swelling in his chest. She was healing, growing stronger every day. The toxic lessons Melissa had tried to instill were fading, replaced by a healthier understanding of love, trust, and genuine strength. Later that evening, as they sat in their new living room, Emily looked up from her homework. Dad? Thank you. For what, princess? For showing me what being strong really means. She met his eyes. It's not about hurting people or using them. It's about protecting the people you love. Jack pulled her into a hug, feeling her small arms wrap around him with complete trust. Outside, the sun set on another day in their new life. While somewhere across town, Melissa stood alone in an empty house, surrounded by the ashes of her own making.